The world fell apart the day the gates opened. From those shimmering, ominous portals came legions of monsters creatures straight from nightmares. Dragons roared across the skies, raining down devastating beams of energy that reduced cities to ashes. On the ground, packs of wolves, orcs, and twisted beasts tore through human defenses like paper. Panic swept across the planet. People screamed, scattered, fled, but it was futile. Nowhere was safe. In the chaos, a small number of humans awakened. They developed abilities no ordinary person could comprehend. These individuals came to be known as players. To the rest of humanity, they were the last hope, the final shield between extinction and survival, wielding swords, staves, shields, and even elemental magic. The players were humanity's answer to a world overrun by horrors. Like characters pulled from a fantasy RPG, they fought to hold back the tide, driven not by glory, but by necessity. Among them stood a man named Lee Hyun-ok. He was far from the strongest ranked at the very bottom, an F-rank player, yet they called him the Great Steel Emperor, a title he certainly didn't ask for. He hoped to one day live up to it. But hope, it turns out, is a fragile thing, easily shattered, like glass under a careless heel. Savior of humanity. Lee Hyun-ok scoffed. What a joke. We find him not on a battlefield, but in a military uniform, drenched in sweat, struggling through yet another punishing drill. This wasn't some prestigious heroes academy. It was anti-monster troop training, a brutal military regimen required for every awakened player. Here, even the lowest-ranked fighters were pushed to their limits. A cartoonish poster nearby painted a deceptive image, a goofy mascot with a thumbs up, a big grin, and the slogan, "We're proud of you." Yeah, right. Lee Hyun-ok bit back another complaint as his muscles screamed in protest. He cursed his luck, his title, and whatever divine joke had led him to this place. The last savior of humanity, he thought bitterly. And I'm stuck here doing squat holds. Like a conscript, they were currently stationed at the AMT shooting range, an isolated training ground tucked in the middle of nowhere. It was a place meant to turn players into soldiers, into weapons. The commanding officer, a barrel-chested man with a face that never smiled, stomped down the stairs toward them. "Listen up, you so-called heroes," he barked. 9 cartridges. Gone, vanished in the last battle. Are your brains made of soup? The soldiers, heads down and butts in the air, responded in perfect unison. No, sir. Lee, meanwhile, was busy doing something entirely different. Subtly, he lifted a single finger. A faint shimmer of power flowed from his body. From his pocket, a single bullet cartridge case floated upward, gliding through the air unnoticed. Hovered briefly, then zipped straight into his mouth. He chewed it like it was gum. This strange act might look absurd, but it was the core of his ability. Lee Hyun-ok could manipulate metal. The more he consumed, the more he could control. And at the moment, the system window floating beside him read, "Available metal mass for manipulation, 300GH, chomped down on the cartridge with a focused expression." Ignoring the shouting around him, this wasn't even his first time doing military training. It was his second. For reasons cruel and unclear, life had decided to drag him through hell all over again. We cut to a flashback. A city under siege. Monsters tearing through the streets. Lee bleeding, broken, slumped against the wreckage of a fallen building. A beam of energy scorches past, leaving only dust and ash behind. Back in the present, Lee narrows his eyes. He knows what's coming next. As the memory fades, a mysterious figure begins to approach the silhouette of a man dressed in a white robe, wearing a plague doctor's mask. Silent, menacing, purposeful, and just like that, the real story begins. The city lay in ruins. Once teeming with life, its streets were now buried beneath the rubble of collapsed buildings and the twisted remains of civilization. Countless human corpses were scattered across the land, a grim testament to the defeat of the players. The air hung heavy with silence, broken only by the distant sound of an explosion. The flash of light from it briefly illuminated the lifeless faces of the fallen men. Women, the elderly, and even children, all slaughtered without mercy. But there were no monsters to be seen. Standing amidst the devastation, Lee Yen, our lone hero, clenched his fists and forced back the tears burning in his eyes. With a bitter scoff, he muttered, So this is how it ends, not with monsters, but with humans devouring their own kind. Just then, a figure in a white robe approached a man who once fought for humanity, now changed. He addressed Lee formally, humanity's last hero, the Great Steel Emperor. But after a moment, the man removed his mask and corrected himself with a cruel smile. "No, you're just Lee Yannick, the F-rank loser." Though he still looked human, the man's blood-red eyes and reptilian pupils revealed the truth. He had abandoned his humanity long ago. "We haven't betrayed humanity," he said coldly. "We judged it. That was our divine duty." Lee's jaw tightened as fury built inside him. "You're not gods," he spat. "You're nothing but monsters pretending to be men. If I had just found the strength even one day earlier, I could have ended all of you. In this twisted world, humans who bartered their souls for power, who turned against their own, were branded as villains. This man was one of them." The white-robed traitor chuckled mockingly. "Frustrated, are you?" As if summoned by the tension, a hulking brute stepped forward, wielding a grotesquely large hammer. Behind him, a blond man smirked. Gordon Pry, another villain in this nightmare. He glanced down at Lee with disdain. "Someone like you," Gordon sneered, "an F-rank. Even with knowledge of the future, you still would have died like a dog." The hammer-wielding brute raised his weapon. "Hi." Gordon's voice was cold and final. "This is the fate that suits your kind." As the hammer came crashing down, Lee screamed Gordon's name, the last act of defiance from a man moments from death, and then everything went black. But that wasn't the end. To Lee's shock, he opened his eyes to a very different scene. Not ruins, not death. He was alive, whole, young again. Time had rewound. Regression, a concept he had only read about in web novels, had somehow become his reality. A glowing system notification appeared before him. "Congratulations, you have discovered the path to growth. Metal absorption begins in 10 minutes. Back in his military days, before the fall, before the slaughter, Lee found himself facing a familiar nightmare. A commanding officer stood before a line of cadets, barking orders with mechanical rhythm. "I say 1, he shouted. "You say soldier. When I say 2, mindset." The recruits echoed in unison. Lee stood among them, body trembling from fatigue, heart pounding with disbelief. He was back at square one, all his powers gone. But strangely, he didn't mind. This was a chance, a real one. The soul-crushing military training resumed. It was harsh, unforgiving. Regression was a gift, but did it really have to send him back here? The sheer irony of returning to boot camp after dying a hero was not lost on him. The scene shifted. Rows of soldiers stood like statues on what resembled a university campus. Their rifles were slung neatly over their shoulders, boots aligned, posture perfect. The air was heavy with discipline. "Platoon 3, Squad 2, barked the officer, "move into the building." And with that, the next chapter of Lee Yannick's second chance began. Judging by the murmurs floating through the air, soldiers quietly speculating about whether stir-fried chicken or stew was on today's menu, this place had to be the canteen. Our main character stood there, his expression a complex mix of disbelief and bitterness. "Back here again. I really didn't think I'd return to this." HELLHOL, just then. The commanding officer barked out orders, telling the other squads to hold position. Corporal Lee Han-wook raised his hand, hoping to speak up, but the officer cut him off. "Not yet. First, there's something you lot need to do." Frustrated, our MC stepped forward. "Sir, we just got back from field training. We're exhausted. And starving. Can't we eat first?" But the officer's lips curled into a sharp, knowing smirk. "Training? What training are you talking about?" he sneered. "You don't even qualify to call it that, loser." And just like that, a familiar presence slithered into the Sino Sangwook. Lee Han-wook almost winced. He'd nearly forgotten about this guy. Every system has its rot, and in the army, it was people like Sangwook abusive, power-hungry. Grunts, who enjoyed stepping on those beneath them, Sangwook approached with an arrogant swagger. "So, you want my team to do your work for you now." He gave Han-wook's helmet a condescending tap. "F-rankers like you can't even level up. Might as well stay busy doing grunt work, only thing you're good for." Han-wook stood silent. In his past life, He genuinely believed he'd never surpass Ifranc. Hearing it now from this lowlife stirred something dark and hot in his chest. Sangwook went on, flipping his head arrogantly. If something serious happens while you're slacking, off will your pathetic squad take responsibility, huh? The nearby soldiers chuckled, clearly entertained by the scene of an F-rank corporal being humiliated in front of his own team. But Hunwook's gaze didn't waver. His fists clenched subtly at his side, not from fear, but rage. It's not at Sang, but at himself, at the weak passive version of him that had once allowed men like this to walk all over him. Sangwook noticed the glare and scoffed. What's with the look? You want to go? You forget I'm a drink. Power crackled around Sangwook's clenched fist, his threat clear. Hanwook inhaled deeply, then slowly exhaled. He relaxed his shoulders and looked up with a calm, almost pleasant expression. We'll handle the work, he said, voice even, but let my squad eat first. That's all I ask. Sangwook didn't like that tone, measured, confident, unshaken. It wasn't fear, it was control. He raised his hand, again, preparing to strike. But Hyunwook was already speaking. There are eyes on us, Corporal. If this escalates, it won't just be about discipline. People might start whispering that you've gone too far, that you're abusing your rank. That wouldn't look too great. For a model soldier, would it? The words hit Sangwook like a slap. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The tension hung in the air a beat longer before. Sangwook exhaled through gritted teeth and slowly lowered his hand. Hanwook bowed slightly. We'll eat quickly and begin the task as ordered. Sangwook cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly thrown off balance. Good job, Corporal. Then he spun around and shouted at the others. Why are you all just standing around? Go eat already. Though Hanwook had navigated the situation smoothly, the bitter taste of humiliation lingered. His appetite was gone. He turned to Park Junmo beside him. You go ahead and eat with the others. I'll catch up. Junmo couldn't help but feel anxious. His superior had been acting strangely lately, but orders were orders. Even if he didn't understand, he had no choice but to follow them. Sergeant Sangwook stood a few steps away, observing Lee Hunwook's behavior with a furrowed brow. There was something unfamiliar about him. The man standing before him wasn't the same one he used to know. Something had shifted. Hyunwook, for his part, walked away silently, his fists clenched and jaw tight. Rage boiled just beneath the surface, and he was barely holding it together. He gave himself quiet credit for not lashing out. But no matter how aggravating this moment was, it still paled in comparison to what that bastard Gordon Pry had done. Grinding his teeth, he cursed under his breath. If Pry stirred up more trouble and delayed things, Hyunwook knew he'd miss his shot at catching him, and that was unacceptable. Still fuming, he pulled out a small piece of metal and swallowed. Another gram absorbed. Another increment added to his metal manipulation pool. His total now stood at 309 GA. Small grin crept onto his face as he retrieved a handful of metal spoons from his jacket. Making sure he was hidden from view, he continued devouring them like snacks, not yet ready to reveal the leveling method he'd discovered. Soldiers were halfway through their meals when someone realized every spoon was missing. Confusion turned to accusations as soldiers began pointing fingers. One of them turned to Private Park Junmo. You've seen the spoons? The young soldier looked baffled. What? No idea. Meanwhile, not far from the mess, Lee Hunwook was still munching happily on the very utensils they were all hunting for. His eyes fell on the M7 bayonet by his side, a weapon weighing 140 grams. With his growing ability, manipulating its weight during combat was the only advantage he could consistently rely on. But his options for growth were limited. Standard cartridges weighed just 1 gram. Spoons, barely more at 1.25 grams. At this rate, building significant power would take too long. He frowned, wondering if the plan he had in mind was really the only path forward. 3 days, that's all he had until he faced a level 1 boss. He needed to be ready. With renewed focus, he lifted the bayonet, using only his mind. The weapon hovered. Steadily, he grinned. It's time they learn what real power looks like. 3 days later, night had fallen over the 3rd Brigade, 1st Battalion, stationed at Ensign's 5th Post. The air was quiet, the darkness heavy. Lee Hunwook stood watch alongside Private Junmo, who kept glancing at him curiously. "You've changed," Corporal Genmo said, his voice cautious but sincere. Hyun-wook didn't look away from his watch. "Does that bother you?" Genmo hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I think it's a good change." Hyun-wook didn't respond immediately. He was watching something else's system window. His metal manipulation capacity had increased. Again, 6 grams more, bringing the total to 1359 G. Progress, then without warning. He turned toward Junmo and approached silently. The private stiffened, worried he'd said something wrong. "Do you trust me?" Hyun-wook asked calmly. Caught off guard, Junmo blinked. "Why, yeah, of course." A smirk tugged at the corner of Hyun-wook's mouth. He nodded, then loaded a fresh magazine into his rifle. Junmo stared in confusion, still unsure what that exchange was about. Suddenly, a disturbance rippled through the air. From a jagged rift in the darkness, a portal tore open near the mountain's side end. From it spilled, twisted, grotesque goblins, snarling and armed to the teeth. Their yellow eyes gleamed with hunger as they surveyed the quiet AMT camp below. Most of the soldiers were fast asleep, unaware of the danger looming above. One of the goblins let out a guttural shriek, rallying the others for the charge, but before it could move, thud, a blade whistled through the night and slammed into its chest, silencing it mid-dash roar. The attacker, Lee Han-wook. He'd anticipated this moment. While others slept, he had been preparing alone. Now, standing at the spawn point, face to face with the enemy, he cracked his neck and grinned. "I've been waiting for you," he said coldly, but something shifted. His eyes narrowed. The goblin he struck, though bleeding heavily, was still alive. Staggering to its feet, "Persistent little bastard," Hyun-wook muttered, his expression hardening. The real fight had just begun. The grotesque beast staggered to its feet, wobbling but determined. In its former life, this thing had never failed to land a kill with a surprise attack. But today was different today. It was humiliated. The realization slammed into him like a hammer. He was still just a level 1. Pathetic, he thought. This was supposed to be his second chance, his reset. The last thing he wanted was to repeat old failures. With a screech of rage, the disfigured creature hurled itself at him head-on, like a javelin launched with hate. It wanted vengeance. It wanted blood, but it never got the chance. In a single fluid motion, Lee Hun's blade flashed like lightning. The next instant, the monster's head was sailing through the air, severed clean from its shoulders. It's decapitated. Body crumpled to the dirt, limbs twitching in the dust. That act of brutality did not go unnoticed. The remaining creatures shrieked, eyes glowing with rage. One by one, they drew their jagged weapons. An all-out war was about to begin. But amidst the rising chaos, something peculiar happened. From the remains of the slain monster, a strange object emerged, glimmering red crystal, almost like a molten gem. It pulsed faintly in the dust. Without hesitation, Lee Hun reached out with a subtle gesture and summoned the object straight into his hand, and then without flinching, he tossed it into his mouth and swallowed it whole. The battlefield froze, even the bloodthirsty monsters paused horrified. That glowing shard had come from one of them, and this man had just eaten it. Their disgust was almost palpable. Truth be told, the taste was unbearable. Lee Hun grimaced as the metallic temps seared his tongue. Absolutely revolting, he thought. In the future, it would be a coveted source of magical power. And now, it was his fuel. A translucent status window flickered into view before his eyes. You have consumed mana steel, mana plus 5, weight increase, unknown, source origin, interdimensional, assimilation, successful. Of his mouth, perfect. This confirmed it. Anything he found, anything rare or strange, he could devour it, and in doing so, grow stronger. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. With that power, life in this brutal world would be a lot more manageable. He glanced up at the snarling monsters who now hesitated, unsure whether they were watching a warrior or a lunatic. Lee Hun raised his blade, the bayonet glinting in the dim light. A calm, almost gleeful smile played on his lips. "All right then," he said, licking the blood from his knife. "The mukbang begins now." Before diving deeper into this chaotic saga, let's take a step back right after Corporal Lee Hyun-wook reloaded his weapon in front of Private Junmo. He turned to his subordinate with a serious expression and revealed something startling. Could sense the movement of Metal Knot, just what he could see. This left Genmo baffled. As he'd been told, Hunnick's ability was limited to visible metal. Confused but concerned, Genmo immediately offered to report the development. But Hunnick shut him down with a cold truth. The higher-ups at the branch office would never believe an F-rank soldier had such advanced perception. And worse, if the military got wind of his true ability, they'd confiscate every weapon he found, leaving him powerless to grow stronger. So Hunnick made a decision. He would investigate alone. He ordered Genmo to stay behind, hold the perimeter, and above all, say nothing. This wasn't just about secrecy, it was survival. Just as he pushed forward, the battlefield exploded with movement. Monstrous enemies surged toward him, weapons raised and bloodlust in their eyes. But Hunnick didn't flinch. He advanced, completely composed, wielding his bayonet like an artist with a brush. Every strike was deliberate, efficient, deadly. A sudden roll, he slipped under the attacking vanguard, emerging behind them. Now exposed from the rear, the monsters didn't even have time to react before Hunnick unleashed his spinning bayonet, which sliced through their ankles and legs, immobilizing them in a storm of pain. As screams rang out, one lone figure watched. From above, perched on a tree branch. Bigger, stronger, and more fearsome than the others, it was clearly a higher-ranking monster. Sharp teeth, bulging muscle, and a predator's patience. But Hunnick was lost in the rhythm of carnage, taunting the horde as he dismembered them. The bayonet danced between limbs and throats, turning the battlefield into a nightmare. Just then, a goblin slipped into his blind spot. Blade raised, it lunged silently. But Hunnick had anticipated everything. With precision, he seized control of another monster's weapon using his metal sensing ability, manipulating it mid-air to parry the ambush. The force of the clash tore the attacker's weapon from its grip, dislocating its wrist. Before the creature could even react, Hunnick's bayonet returned, cutting clean across its throat. Blood spilled in silence as the monster collapsed, airless and twitching. Hunnick didn't just kill it, he made it suffer. His eyes burned with malice as he turned to the rest. "You think a backstab is enough to take me down?" he growled, his voice venomous. "You dare sneak up on me? Try that again, and I'll eat you alive." There was no mistaking it now. In that moment, Hunnick seemed more terrifying than the monsters themselves. His bloodlust choked the air. The goblins, once frenzied, now stood frozen. They stared at him wide-eyed, trembling, gripped by primal fear. Their will to fight began to unravel. But Hunnick wasn't finished. Calmly, he scanned the battlefield. "Where's the main course tonight?" he muttered, eyes darting left and right. His tone was eager, frustrated. He could feel the presence of something smarter, something stronger, but it stayed hidden. Years of combat had taught him that when the eyes fail, other senses must compensate. He knew exactly who he was hunting: the boss, a goblin shaman, cunning, deadly, and lurking in the trees above. But if it refused to reveal itself, he'd have to tempt it. That's when he spotted a nearby goblin corpse. Hunnick knelt beside it with exaggerated care, feigning distraction. A perfect target, it worked. The shaman took the bait. From its hiding place, it raised one of the talisman-like objects around its neck, readying an attack. But Hunnick didn't flinch. He casually reached for the monosteel on the ground, keeping his posture loose and his guard lowered. The other goblins remained paralyzed, too terrified to move. The trap was setanned. The real battle was just beginning. The shaman moved with urgency, clutching one of its ancient amulets. As its twisted lips chanted arcane syllables, glowing runes ignited in the air around it, evidence that the spell had begun. Watching from the shadows, Hunnick, our protagonist, allowed a cold predator's grin to slip across his face. He wasn't attacking just yet. No, he was waiting, patient, methodical. He knew the moment the boss fully revealed itself, the real hunt would begin. The goblin shaman, cloaked in false confidence, believed it had the element of surprise. It smirked, convinced that its spell would catch the enemy unprepared. As the incantation reached its crescendo, the shaman shattered the amulet in its clawed hand. The effect was immediate. The earth beneath them groaned as if in pain, and then ruptured violently. Jagged rock spikes shot skyward, splintering the ground and threatening to throw Hyunok off balance. But his calm expression didn't change. He had been waiting for this exact moment. The seismic disturbance told him precisely where the shaman was hiding. A few seconds later, the full force of the spell erupted. Dozens of rock spikes burst through the battlefield, striking everything above them, enemy or ally alike. Goblins were impaled, skewered mid-scream. The spell had no loyalty. It tore through all. The tremors reached as far as the nearby camp, where one of the guards stirred. He nudged his squad leader. "Did you feel that?" The platoon leader, bleary-eyed and in no mood for nonsense, rolled over with a grunt. "Don't bother me again, unless we're under siege." Meanwhile, back on the battlefield, bloodied goblin bodies lay sprawled across the skewered earth. But Hook, the shaman, was not among them. The remaining goblins looked around, panicked. Fear flickered in their dull eyes, not just fear of death, but of the senselessness of it. Even these simple creatures showed more regard for their kin than the shaman who had sacrificed them so carelessly, standing over the field of his own destruction. The shaman gazed proudly at his work. The field of jagged spikes and the rising smoke pleased him. He stood straight, inhaling deeply, reveling in what he believed was a triumph. That moment of arrogance didn't last. A voice drifted from the dissipating smoke, sharp and low. A chill shot down the shaman's spine. The next instant, Hyunok's spinning blade sliced through the smoke like a phantom, hurling toward the shaman at deadly speed. The goblin reacted fast, knocking the weapon aside at the last second. A flicker of skill. This wasn't just any goblin. This was the boss. Feigning frustration, Hyunok narrowed his eyes. The shaman sneered, proud of his deflection. It thought it had turned the tide. That would be its final mistake, because the blade had been a distraction. Before the goblin could fully process the setup, Hyunok came in from the flank, his bayonet streaking toward its exposed side. The blade was nearly at the shaman's throat, when astonishingly it managed to catch the weapon in its hand. A thin line of blood welled on its neck, close but not fatal. Hyunok blinked. This creature was more formidable than expected. The shaman bared its fangs and snarled. It wasn't laughing anymore. Hyunuke smirked, not because he was impressed, but because he was disappointed. Disappointed in himself for not ending it already. Enough tricks. Time for a real fight. The goblin boss stood tall, rallying what remained of his underlings. Energized by their leader's show of strength, the goblins snarled and charged. Courage renewed. Hyunuke was now cornered, and to make matters worse, a system notification appeared in his vision. Mana rapidly depleted. Current level, 40%. He was burning through energy too fast. The situation had gone from bad to worse. With the boss still perched on higher ground and enemies closing in from all sides, Hyunok had to find a way to end this quickly and carefully. Every move had to count now. Hyunwook clenched his jaw, the last flicker of mana fading from his fingertips. He could no longer rely on his abilities. This had to end quickly. As he weighed his options, the enemy shaman across the field began raising his staff again, preparing for another deadly spell. Left with no choice, Hyunwook reluctantly reached for his rifle. He had hoped to finish this using his mana drain skill and absorb the shaman's power. But just as he leveled his weapon, something pulled the boss's attention away. The shaman smirked. He'd spotted something. A new opportunity. Hyunwook was about to open fire when a voice called out from behind him. "Corporal! Corporal! Are you—" It was Private Junmo. He had wandered off, leaving his post in search of his commanding officer. The kid strolled forward casually, completely unaware of the monsters lurking in the shadows. Hyunwook's heart sank. Before he could warn him, the shaman barked an order, and all the goblins surrounding Hyunwook instantly broke away, sprinting toward the defenseless private. With no time to lose, Hyunwook abandoned his shot at the boss and pivoted, sprinting toward Gunmo. "Get down," he shouted. Junmo froze as the nearest goblin lunged, claws ready to rip him apart. Hyunwook fired just in time, bullets shredding through the beast mid-lip. But he knew bullets alone wouldn't kill it. He summoned a mana blade, to finish the job only for the goblin to parry it with surprising ease. "They're adapting," Hyunwook thought grimly, "but it's still not enough to take me down." With brutal efficiency, he followed up with a flying knee to the goblin's jaw, staggering the creature. Then, pressing the barrel of his rifle to its open mouth, he unloaded the rest of his magazine point blank. The goblin collapsed, turned, ready for the next threat, but there were none. The rest of the goblins had vanished. Genmo was the only one still present, curled up on the ground, trembling. They'd fled. The monsters had recognized they couldn't win and retreated before being wiped out. Frustrated, Hyunwook clicked his tongue. He hadn't expected the goblins to be this strategic. The opportunity to eliminate them all had slipped away. His radio crackled. Gunfire reported at 5th post. Status: this is Corporal Hanwook. A gate has appeared. Enemy contact goblins. They've retreated. No casualties, he replied, glancing at Genmo to confirm. Understood. Hold your position and prepare to defend. Reinforcements are on standby, the voice at HQ responded. Hanwook's expression darkened. He knew what that meant. She was coming. A 5-minute standby was ordered. Across the battlefield, a woman with fiery red hair began donning her gear. Lieutenant Seo Yunha of the Paladin Corps' flawless, lethal, and bound to protocol. If she arrived before him, she'd close the gate. And, by military law, any dropped weapons or items, especially legendary ones, would be seized. That included the adamantium weapon, the very item that, in Hanwook's past life, had made him the feared Steel Emperor. If he missed this chance, it wouldn't reappear for another 4 years. He couldn't let history repeat itself. He had to act now. There was still time. Goblins needed a living human to complete their ritual. They couldn't have gone far. Hyunwook narrowed down their likely retreat paths, ruling out a city invasion. Their numbers were too low for something. So Boldot. Just then, the radio crackled again, this time from the 6th post. We're under attack. Goblins requesting immediate backup. Hope surged through Hyunwook. They're there, he turned to Junmo, a grin creeping across his face. We're moving. 5th post, heading to assist the 6th, but HQ immediately shut him down. Negative. F-rank personnel are not authorized to mobilize. Stand by and await orders. Genmo looked terrified. Corporal, please don't. This won't end with a simple reprimand. You could face a military tribunal, but Hyunwook was unfazed. The 6th post is mostly ranged fighters. Mages, if goblins get close, they'll be slaughtered. Genmo hesitated, but going alone, what difference can one man make? Hyunwook's grin widened. I'm not going alone. You're coming too. Genmo's face drained of color. The situation at Outpost 6 had deteriorated into chaos. Panic rippled through the ranks as soldiers struggled to maintain order. Their commanding officer, Corporal Kim Jong-go, was down, gravely wounded. The goblins were swarming the perimeter. With relentless fury, with headquarters issuing only one brutal command, hold your ground at all costs, the defenders knew they were running out of time. Inside the battered guardhouse, the remaining troops had barricaded themselves in backs. Against the wall, as claws and clubs pounded the doors, though bloodied and pale, Corporal Kim still pushed his ability to its limits, channeling every ounce of strength into reinforcing the guardhouse walls. His second-in-command hovered close, face drawn with worry. Kim's breathing was shallow, his lips barely moving as he murmured, I can't hold much longer. The barrier's collapsing. Desperation overtook discipline. The radio crackled with the second-in-command's frantic pleas for support, repeated over and over into static. Then, abruptly, the world outside went silent. No snarls, no pounding, just a bone-chilling stillness. But it was only the beginning. Without warning, stones and debris began to rise off the ground, suspended in a supernatural stillness. Shaman had entered the fray. Its twisted staff raised high as it chanted a spell of telekinetic doom in a heartbeat. The eerie calm shattered as the sky rained stone. Boulders and jagged shards hammered the guardhouse, cracking the reinforced walls, splintering wood, and filling the air with dust. The defenders inside huddled in silence, hearts pounding, knowing that their last refuge wouldn't survive. His second-in-command lunged forward to stop him, but faltered, knowing it was futile. Tears welled in his eyes. They were out of time. Outside, the goblin boss stood smug, gathering another wave of rubble for the final strike. It grinned, sensing victory. The next volley would reduce the guardhouse to rubble land, the humans with it. Then static. The radio sparked to life, a voice piercing the gloom. Backup was on the way. The voice ordered them to ready a bow and shoot toward a light that would appear outside, using fire-infused skills for maximum impact. Doubt flickered among the soldiers. But with death all around, obedience became hope. One of the privates peered out through the cracks in the wall, eyes scanning the chaos. "I can't see it," he muttered, frustration rising. "Too much debris. There's no light." Then, as if summoned by his desperation, a flash shimmered in the distance. That was it. Now, barked the voice over the radio, it was Lee Hyun-yuke, the main force behind the counterattack. "Private Park, take the shot. I'll guide the trigger remotely." Park hesitated. The arrow launched, slicing through the air, dodging the floating rocks as if guided by fate itself. It struck the goblin Mount Hyun-yuke was riding, piercing it clean through. A beat of silence, then an explosion rocked the air. The goblin fell, lifeless, as the arrow's fire magic detonated within. The sheer force of the strike sent shockwaves through the enemy lines. And the kicker, that maneuver cost Hyun-yuke only 1% of his mana. He had calculated it precisely just enough. The tide was about to turn. A hailstorm of boulders tore through the air, but instead of hitting their mark, the barrage struck only a single unlucky goblin already writhing in flames from an earlier fire arrow. Hyun-wook had dodged just in time. The enemy archer stood frozen, stunned that their attack had missed so thoroughly. A sharp command snapped him out of a tree load and fire again. Without hesitation, he knocked another arrow and took aim at the shining target. Meanwhile, the goblin shaman scanned the battlefield, eager to confirm a hit. But a quick glance at his belt of amulets showed only 2 remaining spells left. His hopes crumbled as he found not a downed enemy, but one of his own lieutenants, barely alive, trembling on the verge of combustion. The sight filled the shaman with fury. Another spell wasted, another failure. Elsewhere, Private Junmo crept through the underbrush, carefully keeping low. He'd been ordered by Hyun-wook to locate the boss monster. As he maneuvered around the outskirts of the battle, he mulled over how he'd signal his superior once he found the shaman assuming. He wasn't killed first. Then he saw Ithachaos left in Hyun-wook's wake. Goblins sprinted around in panic, their bodies lit like torches, shrieking in agony. Junmo could hardly believe his eyes. He'd expected a distraction. Instead, but before the blade could strike, a bayonet streaked through the air, impaling the creature in the nick of time. Hyun-wook emerged from the shadows, activating his light to signal the archer for support. Another arrow launched, guided midair by Hyun-wook's ability, and struck the enemy cleanly. Before leaving, Hyun-wook gestured at Junmo to ready his rifle. The young private complied, still reeling from everything. Was this really the same corporal he once knew? One by one, goblins dropped like flies, and the shaman, hidden somewhere in the shadows, watched in disbelief. Why was he still hiding, while his forces were being annihilated? Then it hit Hyun-wook. The shaman had a plan. He was stalling, biding his time, hoping Hyun-wook would run out of mana, and it was working. Hyun-wook's energy reserves were nearly depleted down to 12%. Desperate to locate the shaman before he became vulnerable, he pressed on. That's when he heard Junmo's voice, shouting for help. Spinning around, Hyun-wook's eyes locked on the shaman, now out in the open and holding Junmo hostage. Clawed hand wrapped around the private's head like a vice, Hyun-wook tried to launch his bayonet again, but the shaman pressed the tip of his twisted staff against Junmo's neck. A clear threat. One wrong move, and he'd end the private's life. Hyun-wook clenched his jaw, seething. With no other option, he raised his hands slowly, feigning surrender. The surrounding goblins crept in, sensing an opportunity. They closed in, howling with triumph. But Hyun-wook wasn't done. He looked at Junmo as ever and thanked him for delivering the checkmate. With a subtle twitch of his fingers, Hyun-wook triggered the mechanism on Junmo's rifle. It fired instantly, right into the shaman's gut. The bullets tore through him, and the goblin priest coughed up a thick spray of blood, critically wounded. Without hesitation, Hyun-wook surged forward, weaving between incoming attacks as goblins tried to defend their leader. The shaman staggered backward, unable to maintain his grip on Junmo, and collapsed to his knees. Junmo gasped for air, but quickly assured his corporal he was fine. Hyun-wook gave a slight nod, a smile of quiet relief tugging at his lips. The shaman tried to flee, clutching his mangled side, stumbling through the grass. But Hyun-wook's bayonet wasn't far behind. It spun through the air like a hunter locked on its prey, and struck true. The monster's attack slams into the shaman's back butt. Instead of crippling him, it deflects harmlessly. The shaman had been smart enough to equip leather armor. Meanwhile, Hook's mana pool is running dangerously lonely. 9% left, but he's not giving up. Eyes locked on his prey, he keeps up the pressure, refusing to let the fleeing shaman escape. The shaman bolts for the fortress gate in a last-ditch attempt to get away. At this rate, he might actually succeed. But then Hook's eyes catch something. The glint of steel dangling from the shaman's necklace. With just 7% mana remaining, he throws everything he has into one last gambit, channeling his remaining power into the steel ornament. It works. The necklace jerks mid-air, and the shaman stumbles, halted. Huk doesn't hesitate. His mana gauge hits 0 as he drives his bayonet forward, forcing the goblin shaman to swallow attending him. The strain hits Hook like a truck. He's panting, body trembling from the exertion. He knows he's far from his peak, his current. Physical form tires, too, easily. He needs time. He needs strength. Just as he steadies his breath, fireworks blaze in the sky-bright streaks of holy light. That signal means the main army has arrived. And with them, SEO Yunha, the AMT's top-ranked player. Hook knows he's on the clock now. If he wants to claim the adamantium, he has to find it before the military confiscates the battlefield. He rifles through the shaman's corpse quickly and finally lays hands on the prize, the Manus steel. But before he can do anything else, boots crunch on stone. Soldiers arrive, weapons raised, barking for him to identify himself and surrender. Blood from the goblin still coats the crystal in his hand. Without flinching, Hook jams the adamantium into his mouth and swallows it whole. Still catching his breath, he slowly turns to face the soldiers. Green goblin blood smears his face, and he looks like something feral. One of the soldiers suddenly recognizes Hyun-wook. He rushes forward, helping him up while the others stay alert. The gate is still open, and enemies could still be lurking nearby. SEO Yunha arrives shortly after and scans the battlefield. Something doesn't sit right with her. 4 regular soldiers taking down a boss-class monster. Unlikely. As she examines the goblin corpses, a pattern emerges. Similar wounds, all precise. Her instincts kick in. This was the work of a single fighter. Of course, her reputation as a MT's paladin isn't just for show. Back with our protagonist, a system window appears in his vision, confirming the adamantium has been successfully ingested. It'll take 10 hours to fully integrate, but it's enough. He smiles faintly as soldiers load him onto a stretcher. SEO Yunha watches him closely. Something's off. Why would someone in his condition be smiling? Her suspicion lingers, but she's interrupted by a report. Goblins are regrouping near the 6th post. Meanwhile, Hyun-wook, lying on the stretcher, begins to feel the subtle shift in his senses. Though the adamantium hasn't finished bonding, the resonance of metal in the environment is already responding to him. Today marks the beginning of his rise. The Steel Emperor is coming back. Several days had passed since the gate incident at the barracks, but the buzz it created hadn't died down. Whispers flitted through the ranks about a certain F-rank soldier, someone supposedly tied to the total destruction of the goblin horde. At the 6th post, people murmured that the soldiers were bracing for death, until a lone F-rank corporal burst in, wielding a massive sword and cutting through goblins like they were made of paper. While most were swept up in the sensational tale, one man wasn't having any of its Argent Osang-guk, the wizard commander. Of the 2nd squad from the communications division, he scoffed at the idea that someone of such low rank could achieve anything noteworthy. But a subordinate stood firm, insisting the story was real. Before the private could say more, a heavyset officer barked at him to lower his voice. Typical F-rank power play. The soldier, trembling, lowered his salute belatedly, and Sergeant O, clearly annoyed, finally returned it. The soldier, named Private Park Anil, a short archer from the post, was visibly shaken and quickly promised to correct himself. Sang-guk turned to the bulky officer and asked mockingly whether he could personally rip goblins apart with his bare hands or take on 3 enemies in a gate raid solo. Wansuk, the burly man, admitted he couldn't. Sanguk nodded, satisfied. Exactly. No matter how you spin it, it's impossible. A laborer, let alone an F rank, couldn't have pulled it off. They dismissed the whole thing as a fluke. Still, even flukes have consequences. An F rank soldier breaking formation and stealing the spotlight. That could threaten the entire chain of command. Wansuk, sensing an opportunity to stir up trouble, proposed they handle the corporal before the situation disrupted military order. Meanwhile, the weather outside was uncharacteristically beautiful, sunlight painting the buildings in a golden sheen. Inside the battalion headquarters, a sharp salute echoed through the room. It was our protagonist, Hunok, the so-called Great Steel Emperor, reporting to the battalion commander. Despite his calm exterior, Hunok was anything but relaxed. Deep down, he knew the military wasn't going to let the gate incident slide. In the room with him stood two other officers, Lieutenant Ku Yunha, a black-clad paladin and a formidable B-rank player, and Lieutenant Lee Minhei, a C-rank warp wizard from the Magic Corps. Major Kim Kang-ho, also known as the Mountain King of Namsan, ranked 166th among South Korea's players, sized up Hunok with a stern gaze. Did you defy the standby order and single-handedly push back the first wave from the gate? He asked, his tone heavy with disbelief. Hunok knew this was a dangerous moment. One wrong word and he could be court-martialed or worse, thrown in the guardhouse, but he didn't flinch. He answered truthfully. He had been on duty when the gate opened and responded on instinct. The major stared at him, eyebrows furrowed. An F rank should have been shredded in seconds. Even with a past title like humanity's last savior, Hunok could feel the weight of the major's authority crushing him. Still, if he backed down now, his entire future in the military would be over. So he stood tall and spoke with conviction. Honestly, sir, I feel like I've been conned. Lieutenant Minhei bristled at the apparent disrespect and stepped forward, but Major Kang-ho raised a hand, stopping her. Let him finish, the major said, his curiosity piqued. Why do you feel that way? Hunok stood firm as he spoke, insisting that ever since joining the AMT, the battalion commander had planted something deep within their hearts, a sense of duty, a conviction. His words caught the major off guard, sparking curiosity. The major had always emphasized one core lesson to every cadet. Rank doesn't define strength. Even an E-rank soldier, armed with the proper tactics from the AMT manual, could go toe-to-toe with trolls. That philosophy guided Hunok's actions. Hun UK explained that the enemies he fought were just goblins, not exactly impossible targets, and yes, he had disobeyed the control center's orders by rushing to assist the soldiers at Post 6. But had he not, they'd all be dead. Internally, the Great Steel Emperor applauded himself for executing a rational defense. Now, he shifted to an emotional appeal. He quoted the major's own teachings for a true soldier. Rank means nothing. You must always be ready to fight with everything you've got. He added that those were the very words of the battalion commander, someone he deeply admired. Hunok explained how he took those lessons seriously, even during grueling training. That mindset was the only thing that helped him endure being constantly mocked for his F-rank status. It gave him a reason to push forward. So when the major questioned his choices, it felt like his entire military journey, every hardship, every sacrifice was being dismissed. It was as if everything he believed in had been a lie. He couldn't help but feel betrayed. Then, the story briefly turned to the man who inspired him, battalion commander Kim Kang-ho, appointed as a second lieutenant. Just as the gates began opening, he nearly lost his life battling orcs. Yet he returned without hesitation and became a cornerstone of the AMT, a soldier to the bone. Back in the present, Hunok finished his speech by saying he had merely followed the commander's example, putting his life on the line for the good of his comrades, a moving testimony. Surely, the major wouldn't send someone like him to military trial. Suddenly, the towering major stepped forward and placed a hand on Hunok's shoulder. The corporal felt a surge of anxiety. Something about the major's silence and expression unsettled him. Then came the verdict. The major announced that Hunok was being promoted to non-commissioned officer, NCO, a position of leadership and responsibility, though still below commissioned officers. A stunned silence fell over the room. Right then, Hunok's system chimed. The adamantium absorption process had finished. He had gained a new skill, steel physique. His total weight control now read 2,558 grams. The lieutenants, especially Yuna, were dumbfounded by the major's sudden promotion decision. Yuna even facepalmed in disbelief, but the commander stood firm, his eyes glassy with emotion after hearing Hunnick's tale of valor. Meanwhile, Hunnick was sweating buckets. This was not the outcome he had hoped for. He just wanted to keep a low profile, but now he had a rank, a spotlight, and way more responsibility than expected. Later, the scene shifted to the 1st Battalion's training facility at the 3rd Brigade Station. The room buzzed with activity as soldiers trained hard. Among them was Hunnick on a bench press, muttering curses under his breath. He had tried to avoid the guardhouse mess, only to land himself in a bigger predicament. Off in the corner, Private Wonzak and Sergeant Sang-guk watched him, sharing a smirk. A plan was forming. As Hunnick wiped his sweat, he reflected on his situation. Thanks to Lieutenant Li Min's help, he had been given some time to think about the promotion. After all, an F rank becoming an NCO was unheard of, but now, keeping a low profile seemed impossible. Wonzak approached and casually asked if the bench was free despite it clearly not being an awkward silence stretched between them. Then Hunnick finally asked what he wanted. With smug confidence, Wonzak mocked the celebrity corporal, noting how his lifting weight was embarrassingly low. He snatched the barbell and showed off with a flourish. Their exchange quickly caught the attention of nearby soldiers. Hunnick realized this was orchestrated by Sergeant Sang-guk. If he backed down now, Wonzak would walk all over him, just like in his past life, though he'd hoped to lie low. This left him no choice. With a glare, Hunnick told Wonzak that his timing was perfect. He was already in a bad mood. Then, to everyone's shock, he challenged the hulking Private to a spar. The gym fell silent. Even Wonzak and Sang-guk seemed caught off guard, but quickly masked it with grins. This was their perfect chance to publicly humiliate the newly promoted NCO. Word spread. Like wildfire, within moments, soldiers swarmed the octagon arena. The match was on dot as both men suited up. Wonzak couldn't hide his glee. He declared that it was time for fantastic Private Lee Hunnick to get a lesson he wouldn't forget. The energy in the arena is electric cheers echo from every corner as two young fighters step into the ring, calm and collected. They're about to put on a show, and everyone knows it. One of them, flashing a cocky grin, doesn't hesitate. He throws the first punch, but the other guy, he's not fazed. He stands there like he owns the place, fists clenched and ready to brawl. The big guy goes all in, launching a heavy punch aimed right at the blue-haired opponent. The force behind it is intense. It cuts through the air like a cannonball. Then, we cut to a peaceful night outside the city. Stars twinkle overhead as two men lounge under a street lamp. Out of nowhere, one of them gasps, stunned. Did you hear Choi Yoonjin's on vacation? The guy in the green cap gives a knowing smirk. He admits he had to see it for himself. After all, rumor has it Choi's got the chops to become a real-deal sword saint. Another man nearby steps in to spare Officer Chun's disappointed expression. He reassures him, saying that while Sergeant Choi Mango is currently the top dog, there's someone else coming up a future ace, and he's got the barbarian trait. That's right, Officer Choi Mango, the strategic genius of the Black Tiger Unit, an elite special forces squad cloaked in secrecy. Good luck digging up any more info on them mitts, all classified. Despite the letdown, Chen keeps his cool. As a warrant officer, he's seen his fair share. The soldier next to him offers a helpful tip. Since Chen came all this way, might as well stay and check things out. No sense going home empty-handed. Back in the ring, the blue-haired fighter is locked in a tough dance with his towering opponent. Each incoming punch is like a sledgehammer, but our guy's holding firm, staying grounded. Another massive fist comes flying, but he's quick, ducking with perfect timing. The crowd roars. Realizing single punches aren't doing the trick, the heavy hitter unleashes a furious combo. A barrage rains down, but the blue-haired fighter is like water, weaving through every strike with effortless grace. Then, a misstep, he stumbles backward and crashes into the boundary net. The arena goes silent. He catches himself, still on his feet, still focused. But just as he prepares to counter, the big guy's already winding up for another devastating Blue. The look on our hero's face says it. All this could be bad. Spectators gasp. No one saw this coming. And then, the punch misses. It slams into the boundary net as the blue-haired fighter rolls out of the way like a ghost. He's back on his feet in a flash, ready and steady, striking a poised stance. Meanwhile, his opponent's frustration is boiling over. Steam might as well be shooting out of his ears. With a sly smirk, the blue-haired fighter flicks two fingers toward him, taunting with a silent "come at me." That tiny gesture is all it takes to tip the hefty guy over the edge. Round 2 is about to begin. The arena is shaking with excitement. Warrant Officer Cheon and the soldier have arrived, just in time to witness the chaos. The soldier nudges Cheon, suggesting this whole setup might have been staged just for him to see. Cheon narrows his eyes, watching intently. He turns to the soldier and asks what he thinks of the match. The soldier simply nods toward the ring and says, "Doesn't look like it, but those punches, they've got real weight behind them." As the fight unfolds, it becomes glaringly obvious, despite the thunder in those punches, none of them are landing. The blue-haired opponent remains untouched, his expression unreadable, while the hefty guy's wild swings slice through nothing. But from the sidelines, the warrant officer narrows his eyes, murmuring with a mix of irritation and curiosity, "What's the use of all that muscle if you can't even connect?" One of the soldiers beside him tries to offer a hopeful perspective. Maybe he's just green. If he manages to hit even once, that other guy's toast. We cut to Sergeant Sanguk, nearly exploding with frustration. His voice booms across the training field as he berates the hefty guy, jabbing a finger toward the arena. "Stop playing around. Hit him like you mean it." The crowd joins in, their voices rising into a chorus of impatience and urgency. They aren't just spectators. They've got wagers riding on this. Don't hold back. This isn't some warm-up drill. But from the hefty guy's point of view, this isn't some casual sparring match. He's fighting with everything he's got. Tan still coming up short. The pressure mounts, the weight of all those eyes burning into him, and suddenly his limbs feel sluggish, heavy. Like he's fighting underwater, gritting his teeth, he barrels forward again, determined to break through. That's when things take a strange turn. The metal pieces on his uniform zippers, buckles, even the eyelets on his boots begin to glimmer with a faint, ethereal blue. And just a few paces away, the blue-haired opponent subtly moves his fingers as if orchestrating the glow. Metal manipulation. With precise, invisible control, the blue-haired fighter begins altering the very battlefield. Every step the hefty guy takes feels like dragging his boots through lead. The ground itself might as well be quicksand. Still, the hefty guy doesn't back down. Though he's practically rooted to the floor, he continues to swing wildly, his body straining as though each movement demands triple the energy. It's as if he's sparring in a swamp butt. He refuses to stop. Watching this unfold, the blue-haired fighter can't help but grin. It's not mockery, it's amusement. He's enjoying the spectacle. Then suddenly, the hefty guy raises his hand, signaling a timeout. "Something's wrong with my legs," he grunts, frustration thick in his voice. Meanwhile, his opponent just smirks wider, clearly savoring the advantage. The grin on his face is all teeth a Cheshire cat, basking in chaos. The hefty guy clenches his jaw, breathing heavily. Then his expression shifts, something snaps. Without warning, he unleashes his power. A shockwave kicks up dust around him. His body surges, his eyes flash, and the ground seems to tremble. The soldier beside the warrant perks up, sensing the change, while the warrant leans in with curiosity. This isn't the same fighter anymore. With a roar, the hefty guy begins to grow, bulking up rapidly, muscles swelling, his veins bulging like coiled wires under his skin. His very presence becomes intimidating, monstrous. "Berserker mode," he bellows, towering over the arena. His eyes lock onto the blue-haired opponent, who's still standing calm, still unshaken. Now, even Sergeant Sanguk isn't shouting, he's wide-eyed, caught between awe and concern. This match has escalated far beyond routine sparring. It's a clash of abilities. Now steel against storm, brute force versus precision control. And yet, the blue-haired fighter still hasn't flinched. From the warrant's perspective, this just got interesting. The clash has spiraled into a brutal standoff, not unlike a savage duel between two wild beasts, a furious buffalo locking horns with a leopard that's just revealed its fangs. The spectacle has everyone on edge. Even the soldier watching can't hide his enthusiasm. He's exhilarated, noting that the commanding officer actually seems to respect the hulking brute, calling him a true adversary. He even remarks that it's the first time he's seen a berserker with actual body-enhancing abilities. Now, the colossal figure, this mountain of a man, steps forward with menacing pride, flinging verbal jabs like they're as heavy as his fists. He warns the steel fighter that he's already a dead man walking, before the crowd can react. The massive brute vanishes from his spot and reappears right in front of his opponent, landing a thunderous punch straight into his gut. The impact is so intense, the blue-haired fighter is sent hurtling toward the barrier net like a ragdoll in the stands. Sergeant Sanguk is howling with joy. He's practically losing his mind, ecstatic that the steel-fisted fighter might finally be going down. His cheers only fueled the frenzy pulsing through the crowd. But down in the arena, something strange happens. After the blow lands, the giant's hand begins to tremble, steam coiling up from his palm. A flicker of doubt flashes across his eyes. He mutters under his breath, "What the hell did he just hit? That didn't feel like flesh and bone. That felt like metal." Then, rising to his feet with eerie calm, the steel guy plants himself in a defensive stance. He's not just still standing, he looks ready for more. A glance at his profile reveals he's a rank D combatant, a user of mana who can temporarily harden parts of his body using high-density magical metal. In fact, the more of that rare metal he consumes, the stronger his ability becomes until sections of his body literally become steel. That would explain his rock-solid fist sand, his cocky grin. He taunts the big guy, throwing out an insult like a dagger. "Come on, pig, let's dance." The insult hits its mark. The berserker bellows in rage, cursing and roaring, branding his opponent a worthless F-rank loser. He charges again, fist raised only to slam it into thin air. Now it's the steel fighter's turn. With a grimace, he mutters that using his powers on someone like this feels like overkill, but there's no other choice. His feet turn to steel, rooting him to the ground. Then he unleashes a devastating counterattack, slamming a punch right into the berserker's face. The crowd gasps. The towering brute, once so confident, now stumbles back like a giant who's lost his footing. His bloated arrogance crumples with the blow, leaving him dazed and wobbling like a chicken that just got its beak smacked. And the steel fighter, he's not letting up. He launches into a flurry of punches, machine-like and merciless, raining down blows with the fury of a boxer on a mission. Each hit sends shockwaves through the air. The audience sits stunned, jaws hanging low. Even Sergeant Sanguk's earlier smugness has frozen on his face. As for Warrant Officer Chayon, he grins like a lizard, sunbathing, clearly thrilled to discover that there's a hidden predator in his own ranks. This isn't just a fight anymore, it's a nature documentary in real time, a sleek predator finally mauling its lumbering prey. But then, just as everyone assumes the battle's over, the berserker proves he's not down yet. With a sudden roar, he seizes the steel fighter by the collar and lifts him clean off the ground with his monstrous hands. One glance at his battered face-blackened eye, swollen features reveals the true cost of the fight. Gritting his teeth in fury, he bellows accusations, demanding to know what kind of sorcery he's dealing with. And then we see it just how massive those hands really are. It's like watching a kitten being clutched by an angry gorilla. With a furious yell, the berserker hurls him skyward as he flies. The steel fighter has just enough time to think one very clear thought. Yep, I'm completely screwed. Despite the odds, our blue-haired protagonist refuses to surrender. Gritting his teeth, he clings fiercely to the giant's massive fist, his legs crackling with electricity as they coil around the brute like a vice. The sudden surge catches the giant off guard. Now they're tumbling together toward the ground only inches from impact. For a moment, the giant seems stunned, paralyzed by the unexpected tenacity. From a distance, Warrant Officer Kine watches with razor-sharp focus, though rough around the edges. Even he's impressed. He hadn't expected this buffalo guy to dodge a bone-snapping attack so instinctively. But as his eyes shift to the blue-haired fighter, doubt creeps in. Had he overestimated this? so-called Steel Warrior. After all, taking on a reinforced barbarian head-on is no easy feat. Locked in a deadlock, muscles strained and unmoving, the giant sneers. He mocks the effort, questioning why someone would fight so desperately for their life. His confidence surging, the beast begins to twist the young man's body in a cruel show of dominance. Scoffing at any attempt to break free, a scream tears from our hero's throat. Furious but still, he doesn't quit. Summoning every ounce of strength, he begins bending one of the giant's monstrous fingers backwards. Shock and fury flash across the giant's face. He hadn't expected such stubborn resistance. And then, without warning, the fighter launches into motion. Like a gymnast, he flips, wrapping his legs around the gorilla's face and vaulting over. His massive frame, in one swift, fluid motion, he secures his grip around the beast's neck, locking in a chokehold. Kain's lips curl into a grin, the kind you'd expect from a lizard basking in the sun. He relishes the moment, watching the impossible unfold, this skinny underdog applying a perfect rear-naked choke on a behemoth. Muscles may be powerful, he muses, but they can't save you from a blocked artery. The giant thrashes, his bravado intact. He boasts that with enough power, he could easily escape, but our blue-haired fighter knows better. His smirk says it always figured out the trick. The camera cuts to his profile card, a reminder that he can temporarily amplify a part of his body. And now he's chosen his hands. The steel grip tightens. The system pings a warning. He's pushing his limits, operating far beyond safe thresholds. His body glows with blue lightning, energy crackling around him as he throws everything he has into this moment. Nearby, one of Sanak's underlings mutters dryly to his master that this might be the end. This fatty might as well sign up for the afterlife. Our Steel Warrior briefly wonders the same. Why won't this monster just give up? His eyes lock onto Sanak's. The message is silent but clear. This is your final warning. Scanning the crowd, he senses the weight of expectation. He's supposed to be the next big thing, the ace. He won't let his reputation crumble now. Steam billows from the giant's body, a mix of desperation and pride boiling over. Then it happens. The giant's muscles swell grotesquely, shredding through his shirt as if he's transforming into something else. He's gone full beast hulking, trembling and terrifying. But despite the transformation, he's still trapped. The chokehold holds firm. Kain watches wide-eyed, a D-rank using body reinforcement twice. Unheard of. He leans forward. It doesn't matter how big you get if you can't break the hold. It's already over. Muscles alone won't save you. And so, the final question hangs in the air like smoke after a battle. Who is the predator here and who is the prey? With one last surge of energy, the blue-haired warrior tightens his grip, the veins in his arms glowing like lightning. Giant writhes, his pain now impossible to mask. The beast is broken. The fight is nearing its end. Pain pierces the silence like a banshee's wail, guttural and echoing. Then, with a dramatic collapse, the fighter crashes to the ground, dragging RMC down with him. The battle reaches its crescendo, holding the crowd breathless as the dust begins to settle. The spectators stand frozen in disbelief, their eyes wide. After witnessing the spectacle, at the sidelines, Warrant Officer Kain grins ear to ear, like someone who just hit the jackpot, clearly relishing the shocking turn of events. Emerging from the haze, our hero rises, steady and unshaken. He stands tall, exuding raw power like a beast, in his natural element, undeniably victorious in this strange duel. Later, in the dead of night, we shift to the training building. A group of recruits circles the unconscious gorilla of a man who had fallen earlier, checking if he's still breathing. Relief washes over them, he's merely fainted. Spared from a true knockout, a curly-haired youth rushes forward, towel in hand, ready to embrace our victorious main character. But the champion stops him with a single raised hand. His eyes aren't on the celebration, they're fixed on someone else. There stands Sanguk, trying to conceal his face, likely turning away from the sting of defeat. Our protagonist's gaze narrows, silently challenging him to face the loss. Just then, a new presence enters the room. The warrant officer steps in and calls for the MC's name. Without hesitation, the young man stands at attention, salutes, and announces himself proudly. Hyunwook, First Company. but something about the timing feels off. Why is the warrant? Here, with a return salute, the officer introduces himself as Lieutenant Chen Mango, the Black Tiger Unit's raid tactics instructor. He praises Han-wook's performance with no fluff or formalities, just raw, honest admiration. Then, extending his hand, he offers Han-wook something extraordinary, a place in the elite warfare. Raid team gasps echo across the room. Spectators murmur in disbelief. Did the Black Tiger unit just scout him? An older soldier whispers in awe, "They're the AMP's finest." Another voice adds, "No way, that guy's just an F rank." Still modest, Hyun-wook admits his rank aloud, almost as if to clear up any misunderstanding. But the warrant waves it off. Ranks are just metrics made by average people. We need warriors like you. Inside, Han-wook's blood thrums with excitement. The thought of joining such a prestigious unit ignites something deep within him, but outwardly, he remains composed, eyes fixed on the invitation card in his hand. Around him, everyone begins to stake a claim in his newfound fame. Yet amid the noise, he remains quiet, lost in thought. The warrant notices the hesitation. "You planning to hold that card forever?" he asks with a smirk. Snapping out of it, Hyun-wook salutes again. He promises to consider the offer. But even as he does, his instincts tell him something's already changed. Sang-guk watches from the shadows, eyes burning with resentment. Outside, calm has returned to the base. But inside the battalion commander's office, two senior officers share tea over a casual conversation. One of them asks about the current state of the Black Tiger unit. The warrant answers, plainly they're understaffed. The other, an anxious-looking gorilla of a man forcing a polite smile, mentions the growing problem. Guilds are actively poaching talent, even from C-rank levels. He sighs, frustrated. We invest all this time into training them, then they get whisked away with promises of external appointments or special opportunities. The two senior officers lock eyes, an unspoken rivalry flickering between them. It's clear they're cut from the same cloth, both intense and sharp. But the tension breaks when the scar-faced officer, nicknamed Gorilla, lets out a nervous laugh. He jokes that the warrant officer must be here about Sergeant Choi Young. Jun, the warrant confirms it with a wide grin and a casual, "That's right." Just as the mood begins to lighten, the room stiffens against Sergeant Choi is currently on leave. That tiny detail sparks another silent battle between the two seniors, each clearly hoping to snag young Jung first, but then the warrant throws. With a glint in his eye, he mentions something even more interesting he's discovered during his visit in. Other promising soldier, suddenly, the conversation isn't just about Choi anymore. This new revelation steals the spotlight. The gorilla falls quiet, deep in thought, while the warrant, calm and snake-like, in demeanor flashes a smug grin. It's clear he feels he's got the upper hand. The gorilla, meanwhile, can't shake the mention of this intriguing recruit. To the mountaintop towers outside, it's dead of night. A mysterious voice breaks the silence, calling out to our main character. Everyone else is asleep, but he's out there running, breath ragged, pulled by that unknown voice. Unbeknownst to him, Gorilla watches from a distance, phone in hand. On the other end is the battalion commander, who confirms his identity and begins to gossip with a strange sense of satisfaction. He proudly reveals he's uncovered what Corporal Lee-hook did before he enlisted. Whatever it is, it seems juicy. Meanwhile, back outside, a curly-haired soldier tries to cling to our protagonist, who has blue hair and a very clear boundary. Annoyed, the MC brushes him off with a blunt reminder. This isn't some sappy romance. Still, the guy persists, hopelessly devoted and eager to be his sidekick. As for Gorilla, he's multitasking like a seasoned spice still on the phone. Now giving a cryptic green light to handle Corporal Lee, it's all very casual for someone orchestrating secret moves. Back to our protagonist, he's drenched in sweat, clearly exhausted, but refuses to stop running. This isn't just PTS, like he's racing against something personal, something bigger. The guy looks like he'd trade a limb for a nap. But he's determined to keep going. And then there's Gorilla watching, and for some reason, wearing a grin that's equal parts unsettling and infatuated. The look in his eyes says it all. He's completely fixated on the MC, staring at him like he's the last slice of pizza at a starving party. As The camera zooms in on that too-wide smile. It's clear this isn't about charm or charisma or blue-haired. Soldier has unknowingly become the hottest commodity in the whole base. In the heart of the bustling city, life moved at its usual fast pace. People weaved through the streets, busy with errands, conversations, and their own little worlds. Among the crowd, a young boy paused, sensing something at an instinct pulling him toward a darkened alley. Convinced he had spotted a monkey, curiosity got the better of him, and he sprinted toward the shadow. But as he reached the alley's entrance and called out, he realized the creature before him wasn't a monkey at all. A chilling awareness crept over him as the beast turned, revealing an ominous, glowing symbol etched into its forehead in enchantment circle. Terror gripped him. And then, the creature wasn't alone. From a swirling portal in the darkness, more emerged, an entire squad of enchanted monsters spilling into the alley like soldiers on command. Elsewhere, on a secured military base, our curious young protagonist had slipped past security and made his way into the battalion's armoria vault of weapons ranging from the ancient to the absurd. Amidst the cache stood a fiery, red-headed woman, her presence demanding attention. She informed him, almost proudly, that the battalion commander himself had acknowledged his recent feats, offering him time off and a weapon of his choosing. But not everyone was celebrating. The platoon leader's face, marked with a jagged eye patch, flickered through the young soldier's memory. A ghost from the past. A reminder of how deeply he was once rooted in a different life. Maybe he hadn't changed as much as he thought. Whether he believes in me or not doesn't matter anymore, he muttered, then turned to the redhead. Don't you think so? She didn't respond right out. Hua just gave him a long look before speaking. You think you're invincible? Now her voice held a challenge. She recounted the damage on the goblin uniforms at the gate-deep precise sword slashes. Every one of them the same. That was all you, right? Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds? He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a sword leaning against the wall, more like a brittle stick than a blade. He swung it around with a grin, playing up the part of the battlefield hero. The redhead blinked, half amused, half horrified. Seriously? She said. You're picking that thing. I'm trying to help you, and you're going to walk out there looking like a kindling salesman. He simply nodded. Nope, this one feels right. The system confirmed his choice. The sword, deceptively simple, was named Cloud Blade. A weapon with the ability to absorb moisture and release thick, concealing fog. It looked useless, but he knew better. This wasn't just a sword. This was a legend waiting to bloom. Voice filled with conviction, he declared that one day this very blade would help Sergeant Choi Young Jun ascend to the rank of Sword Saint. The sword's hidden identity surfaced dark, Hand of the Cloudmaster. In ancient Dangan lore, the Cloudmaster was one of 3 celestial deities. Alongside the wind and rain gods, his weapon, invisible, blade-like hand forged of shadow and lightning, was powerful enough to level mid-tier monster dungeons solo. With steel in his eyes, the boy whispered, "Steel and lightning. No one's stopping me this time." The redhead, still processing his dramatic prophecy, arched a brow. Okay, Cloud Saint, but doesn't it seem a little underwhelming? I mean, for someone like you. He shrugged. I don't have time to be picky. Then suddenly blaring sirens shattered the moment. Their casual conversation broke off as alarm lights lit the base in crimson. Screams, shouts, and hurried footsteps echoed all around. Emergency sirens, warnings of a breakout, and a single word passed urgently from soldier to soldier. Ian, something big had just begun. Chaos erupts like a siren. Soldiers sprint in all directions, hurriedly fixing their gear as if someone just yelled, "Fire!" One moment, our main character was relaxed, soaking in the quiet. Next moment, he's all business. He doesn't say a word, just stands there, sharp-eyed and tense, clearly ready to move. A red-haired woman near him throws him a sideways glance, her suspicion practically screaming, "Why isn't he shocked like the rest of us? And more importantly, why is he so calm?" It's like he's known this was coming all along. The streets of the city are suddenly alive with soldiers securing every corner, each one on edge, making sure nothing slips past them. That's when she arrives, a knight-like woman, stern and composed, marching with her squad like she owns every cobblestone. 2 common soldiers on watch stop what they're doing, eyes wide, "Whoa," one mutters, first time seeing the Blue Flower Guild in action. Other nods, adding they're here as backup for the gate mission. They eye the elite units, gleaming armor and high-end weapons. It's like a fantasy RPG parade, polished, intimidating, borderline ridiculous in style. If you could sell their gear, one of them jokes, you could probably buy a penthouse. In Gangnam, then the blonde soldier of the group casually drops his retirement plan. "I'm transferring to Blue Flower once I'm out. Gonna live that flexing lifestyle." Meanwhile, our main guy is back in focus, leading his own squad. Now, .com, authoritative, like he's been doing this forever. He reminds them the vice president confirmed, this time, it's a cobalt gate. He warns them not to underestimate the enemy. Cobalts may be small, but they fight dirty poison needles, toxic fumes. Way worse than dealing with some bulky orc then he notices one of his men casually rolling up his sleeves. "Not having it," he barks. "This isn't a beach outing. Fix your uniform." As always, there's that one skeptic in every group. One soldier mutters, "Are we sure they'll come this far?" Our man spins on him. This is not a drill. Then, to really make his point, he paints a vivid picture. Imagine a cobalt gouging your eyes out. The soldier snaps to attention. "No, sir," he stammers. But the commander isn't finished yet. He tells everyone to inspect their masks. Poison gas is in play, and safety is non-negotiable. That's when Blondie barges in, voice loud and tone mocking. "Strategy meeting, huh?" he shouts, looking straight at our MC. "Didn't know the trash unit got that fancy." He keeps going, mocking the squad like they're background extras in a big budget raid. The squad members hold their ground, silent and composed. They've heard this all before. Everyone knows the support squad is the so-called benchwarmers, those who never climb the ranks. But our blue-haired commander doesn't flinch. He locks eyes with Blondie, his expression cold and unreadable. He fires back. "Plenty of cobalts, sneak off during raids. Don't get too comfortable just because you're posted at the rear." Masks on, game faces ready. They're heading to the red zone, a designated evac area for when the gate bursts open. Safety always comes first, even if you're labeled trash. But Blondie's not backing down. "I don't need advice from some side character," he spits. "I've got this." He acts like he's the protagonist of some heroic saga while brushing everyone else off as background noise. The commander just glares after him. One last warning on his lips. "Be careful, they're smarter than you think." "Sure," replies with a sneer. "Whatever you say, captain of the reject squad." The rest of the squad says nothing, their silence heavy with frustration and quiet resolve. But inside, RMC is fuming. He's not mad for himself, he's furious for them. His team, his people, trash or not, they're his squad, and he'll make damn sure no one gets to walk all over them. Seething with frustration, the squad leader lets loose a fierce tirade. His voice, low and icy, slices through the tension like a blade. "Get it together," he growls, each word laced with fire. "You've heard this before. Don't act like it's the first time." His eyes narrow, scanning his team like a predator. Eyeing prey. "This isn't some damn simulation," he snarls. "This is real. People die out here. Stay sharp, stay alive." His warning hangs heavy in the air. The soldiers straighten up, snapping to attention. "Yes, sir," they respond in perfect unison, the weight of his command driving deep into their bones. Without skipping a beat, he shifts into briefing mode. Cobalts are small, fast. Their weak point is their emotion sensors focus your attacks. There, in these cramped sewer tunnels, that's your only edge. You've got 20 minutes. Move. The squad disperses instantly, moving with trained precision, boots pounding against damp concrete as they prepare for the coming assault. Corporal Lee calls out, "Junmo," and a soldier answers on reflex, "Yes, sir." Private Park Juno steps up, reporting with a determined spark in his eyes. Amidst the preparation, a hushed conversation stirs. One soldier leans toward another. "Hey, don't you think Corporal Lee looks more tense than usual today?" His partner nods, whispering back, "Yeah, he's dead serious. Must be the closed routes." Everyone's on edge. Indeed, Corporal Lee stands stiffly, surveying the squad with a piercing glare. His eyes land on one unfortunate soldier, who squirms under the weight of the stare. It's like Lee can see straight into his soul. The poor guy forces a crooked smile. Everything? All right, sir. Before the awkward silence can settle, disaster strikes. A whisper of motion and then a needle slams into Corporal Lee's neck. He gasps, stunned, unable to react. Poison. That's all it can be. The kobolds have struck. His knees buckle. The ground rushes up to meet him. Then, chaos erupts. A poison gas canister explodes nearby, releasing a dense green mist. The squad is thrown into disarray, coughing, choking, collapsing one after the other. But it doesn't stop there. Another bomb, then another. The air becomes a lethal fog. Only a few soldiers manage to don their masks in time, scrambling to protect themselves, but it's too late. From the shroud of gas, the kobolds charge, teeth bared, blades flashing. The ambush is swift and merciless. Screams echo through the narrow tunnel as soldiers are torn apart, paralyzed. Lee watches in mute horror, his limbs unresponsive. His SQUAD is falling apart in front of him. Then, emerging from the haze, comes a towering kobold, larger, more vicious than the rest. Its eyes gleam with malice. This is no grunt. This is their leader. Lee's breath catches as the creature raises a jagged dagger. Just as it lunges, a blur crashes into it, throwing its aim off. But not without consequences. Slash opens just below Lee's eye. Pain searing through the poison-induced haze, the kobold hits the ground but is back up in seconds. Bloodied and snarling, dagger still clutched tightly. Lee, barely conscious, reaches out toward a figure rushing through the mist. Juno, without hesitation. Juno drops beside him, forcing a gas mask into his hands. "Put this on," he yells, trying to help. But in a split second, the air goes still. Then dash horror. Juno single quotes, his head is severed cleanly from his body, flung through the air in a grotesque arc. Blood fountains from his neck as his body slumps forward, still twitching. Lee, too weak to scream, can only watch in stunned terror as his comrade's lifeless head rolls to a stop beside him. The world blurs around him, swallowed by the stench of poison, blood, and death. And the kobold leader is still coming. The scene cuts back to the present, where Park Junmo confronts Corporal Lee, demanding to know the reason behind the sudden summons. As the conversation unfolds, a harrowing truth from a previous life is revealed. Park Junmo once sacrificed his life trying to protect Corporal Lee from a kobold ambush. What we witnessed earlier wasn't just a memory, but a glimpse into Lee's former life, one that ended in tragedy. That past has left deep scars. Now in the present, haunted and hardened by the trauma, Corporal Lee takes no chances. He orders sensors to be placed along every conceivable route. His extreme vigilance, once questioned and mocked by Blondie, is now clearly rooted in those haunting memories of loss and betrayal. With the battlefield secured and precautions in place, Lee is no longer hesitant. He's resolved, ready to confront the kobolds without fear. We return to the crucial moment when Lee calls out to Gitmo, who stands at attention, ready to follow his superior's every command without hesitation. Lee looks him in the eye and says that when he gives the signal, Junmo must lead the squad away from the operation zone. Taken aback, Junmo is confused and concerned by the sudden change in orders. He doesn't get time to question it. Out of nowhere, a six-wheeled military vehicle barrels toward them, kicking up clouds of dust and tension. Junmo, still processing the plan, murmurs under his breath, "Armed desertion." But Lee is quick to correct him. "This isn't desertion," he says firmly. "It's a maneuver, a war tactic." In the following scene, communication streams in from scattered squads across the battlefield, urgent reports flooding the command lines. Beta Squad breaks in with critical intel. A kobold nest has been identified near a building in Zone 2. It's crawling with over 200 of the creatures. Within moments, B9 unit is fully mobilized. Their commander issues a series of sharp, practiced hand gestures, cryptic signals understood only by those trained in elite military operations. Silently, the soldiers form up, stepping into a wide-range magic formation, mentally bracing themselves for the confrontation ahead. At a final hand signal, they advance, slipping through a sealed door like shadows. Inside, the soldiers move in synchrony, slipping into position with precision. A crisp command echoes, "Activate the circle." Hold position. Enchantments flare to life across their gear as they brace for combat. Without warning, the kobolds strike. They spill out from the shadows in a writhing mass, swarming like insects disturbed from a nest. Hissing and screeching, they charge forward, enraged by the intrusion. But the soldiers stand firm, no counterattack yet. Orders are orders. The moment one Cobalt lunges too close, the signal is given. In an instant, the air is lit with gunfire and flame. Elemental shots rip through the horde, engulfing the creatures in burning arcs of destruction. Explosions crack through the walls. Fire washing over the battlefield like a cleansing storm. Chaos reigns, but the squad fights with lethal precision, cutting down the Cobalt ranks with unwavering resolve. Meanwhile, outside the nest, Corporal Lee leads a unit working in the streets of Zone 2. They move swiftly, attaching motion sensors at key junctions, securing them with duct tape and aluminum markers. Zone 5 chimes in soon after, confirming their sensors are all successfully deployed as well. As Corporal Lee secures another device, a voice calls from behind. He turns sharply, salutes. It's one of his superiors. Calmly, he explains he's following the deployment manual to the letter, making sure everything is in place. The flag of the Blue Flower Knights flutters in the breeze nearby, a quiet symbol of their presence. But then comes Lieutenant Lee Manhwa, Mage of the Warp Class, C rank. Easily identified by his bright orange hair and sharper than necessary tone. He isn't impressed. With disdain, he reminds Corporal Lee that the Guild's purpose here is evaluation, not to waste time on minor gates. He coldly informs the corporal that the 1st platoon will initiate their operation in 20 minutes, so support squads should focus on preparing detox potions. Unfazed, Corporal Lee explains that, per the Vice Platoon Commander's orders, their mission is to prevent any monsters from escaping and making it to civilian zones. The tension around them is palpable. Other soldiers listen closely, nervous but silent. Lieutenant Lee Minwig clenches his jaw, eyes narrowing. Despite being outmaneuvered, he leans into his authority. With a smug air, he reminds Corporal Lee not to forget who's in charge, hinting at favoritism from the battalion commander. He presses a finger to the corporal's forehead. Power Planned sharply questions him about a certain soldier in the barracks. Corporal Lee, ever composed, answers without hesitation, Private La Hunok. The lieutenant scoffs, the one with just a single gate under his belt. Again, Corporal Lee replies calmly, "Yes, sir, that's him." The lieutenant snaps, "And you think he's qualified to speak back to me?" His voice rises. "Wipe that look off your face." Private Lahunok, standing nearby, keeps his cool. "No, sir," he replies, respectfully but firmly. The confrontation is seconds away from boiling over when a voice cuts in. A pink-haired soldier rushes over, catching her breath. She asks if something's wrong. This is Sergeant Choi Sanha, healing specialist, and C rank, caster mage. Her sudden arrival stuns the lieutenant into silence. His expression shifts immediately. Words fail him. He stares at the sergeant, completely thrown off balance. Exactly as our main character had planned. He baited her into showing up, knowing full well that Lieutenant Lee Min had a soft spot for her. The moment the vice platoon leader arrived, the usually stern, orange-haired lieutenant suddenly shifted his demeanor warm, chummy, as if he and Corporal Lee were lifelong friends. He turned to the pink-haired sergeant, casually explaining that the support squad seemed to be struggling with site assessment, and he'd merely been reminding Corporal Lee of the harsh realities of real combat. Lieutenant Lee, flustered and blushing, glanced at the clumsy woman and asked what brought her here. Her eyes widened as she remembered she was sent with a message. The battalion commander had summoned Private Lee Heinwuk. Our main character was left baffled. Why him? Why now? Nearby, tanks and armored vehicles were assembling in a powerful formation. Atop a rooftop, a commanding woman with sharp eyes surveyed the entire operation through a pair of binoculars. Her stance was calm, focused, and full of authority. Below her, soldiers buzzed around with intensity, preparing for the mission. Amid the organized chaos, she noticed two figures on the street: Sergeant, pink hair, and Corporal Lee. The sergeant leaned in, offering quiet reassurance. "Don't let the 2nd platoon leader rattle you," she said softly. Lee nodded, preparing to move on, though he knew much more still lay ahead. Just before he departed, the commanding lady shot him a quick, playful glance and a warm smile. She told him that others would handle the sensor setup and invited him to accompany her instead. Though unsure and hesitant, Lee couldn't refuse. Anxiety churned in his gut. Something big was coming, and the little time left did nothing to calm his nerves. What did the battalion commander want with him, and why now? The red-haired officer remained watchful on the rooftop, still glued to her binoculars. A soldier beside her raised a concern. Was it really acceptable for the attack squad to be involved in a Cobalt-class raid, especially under the direct authority of the battalion commander? She confirmed it was indeed the commander's directive, and reminded him that a soldier's job is to follow orders, not question them. Eventually, Corporal Lee made his way to the temporary command post, still confused and apprehensive. At the center stood the battalion commander. Lee asked carefully if he'd heard right. Was he really summoned? Also present were two familiar figures, the gruff, scar-faced gorilla of a man and the lizard-like warrant officer. Seeing Lieutenant Chen Mango standing beside the commander only deepened his confusion, especially with the serious energy coming from the gorilla. The battalion commander finally spoke. He wanted to test Lee. He proposed something unexpected. Lee would temporarily take over as squad leader for 1st Platoon on the next gate strike, filling in for Choi Young-jun, who was currently on leave. Shock hit Lee like a wave. Why now, after being overlooked for so long? Despite his disbelief, Lee quickly gathered himself and voiced his concern. He reminded the commander that up to this point, he'd only taken part in missions with the support squad. This wasn't training, it was the real thing. Leading a frontline squad meant putting lives at risk. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that. Inside the command post, the atmosphere turned thick with tension. The gorilla barked out coldly. It wasn't a request, it was an order. Lee clenched his jaw. The weight of it all hit him hard, but there was no running from it. As the commanders discussed, an alert came through. The Delta platoon had just reported that the boss monster had left the Cobalt nest. Soldiers on the 2nd and 3rd perimeters were ordered to prepare for contact. Panic. They're threatened to take hold. Lee realized the support squad could be in danger. He couldn't just sit here. Driven by urgency, he spoke up again, saying there was something he had to say. The battalion commander looked straight at him, encouraging him to go on. But the words wouldn't come. Lee froze. Outside, the red-haired officer continued her surveillance. Her gaze caught something unexpected. Someone sprinting through the street. It was him, Corporal Lee. He ran like the ground itself was about to open up beneath him. His voice rang out across the street, shouting toward the support squad. Desperate cries about the gas. In that instant, sirens wailed. The entire zone erupted into chaos. Just as in his memories, the gas began to seep from the sewer grates thick green. And creeping across the streets like poison dot, everything turned in a flash. And there, in the heart of the madness, was Corporal Lee, wide-eyed, overwhelmed, and terrified as he watched the horror unfold, happening far faster than it ever did in his mind. At the temporary command post of the battalion commander, Corporal Lee steps forward, ready to share critical information with his superiors. The gorilla-like commander gives him a firm nod, signaling him to speak. Corporal Lee begins cautiously, mentioning a rumor he's heard that this very commander once lost his entire platoon. The words hit hard. Both the battalion commander and the sly, lizard-like officer lurking in the background freeze in surprise at the revelation. Lee presses on, his tone sharp. He finds it hard to believe that, knowing his background as a mere support squad member, they're now assigning him to lead a combat squad, and all for some sort of test. Turning to the commander, his frustration boils over. Have you really sunk so low as to view me as nothing more than expendable? An ordinary soldier you can throw away. The commander shakes his head quickly, insisting it's all a misunderstanding. But Lee doesn't relent. With a straight face and unflinching resolve, he declares, if it comes down to following your orders, I'll gladly lay down my life. He can't admit, though, is the real reason behind his resistance. He knows the future. That secret weighs on him like a boulder, driving him to the brink. Truthfully, he has zero interest in leading a combat squad. To drive the point home, he warns the commander that his lack of battlefield experience could put others at deadly risk. High casualties would be inevitable, though he acknowledges the faith the commander has in him. Lee makes it clear, If proving himself comes at such a cost, he's ready to defy orders. His bold words leave the commander momentarily speechless. That's when the warrant officer steps in, his voice cold and sharp. He reminds Lee that defiance in wartime is a capital offense, punishable by death. Lee stays silent, not from fear, but because his mind is on something bigger. The fate of the real world. For a tense moment, silence blankets the room like a storm cloud. Then, to Lee's surprise, the gorilla of a commander relents. "If you're so determined to stick with the original support mission," he says gruffly, "you have my approval." Lee blinks, stunned. But the commander's expression hardens as he adds, "However, like a true soldier, you'll bear the consequences of disobeying orders when this is over." The scene shifts outside. Sirens wail as green gas seeps across the battlefield, choking the air with poison. Lee moves swiftly, keeping low to avoid inhaling the toxic fumes. He straps on his gas mask and mutters curses under his breath, aiming them at the damned kobolds responsible for this mess. From his enchanted inventory box, a magical container capable of holding vast military supplies, he retrieves a sword and a water bottle. Without hesitation, he pours the water over the blade, preparing for what's coming next. As he moves forward, a system window flashes before his eyes, displaying the sword's details. Its name, Cloudblade. The description catches his attention. Not an ordinary weapon. Its unique ability allows it to absorb water and release a dense mist-like fog. Almost on cue, the blade begins to draw in moisture, the absorption rate climbing rapidly until it hits 25%. Now fully equipped, Cloud, blade in hand, and mask secured, he pushes ahead. But the toxic gas shrouding the battlefield clouds his vision, leaving him unsure if he's already too late. Deep down, he hopes everyone managed to escape safely. That hope shatters instantly. The cobalt creatures have arrived. They charge into the fray, mercilessly cutting down soldiers in their path. Right before his eyes, a soldier is ripped apart in a brutal display of violence. And as the view widens, the horror deepens. It's not just one victim. Kobolds are everywhere, swarming like a tide of death. Soldiers fight desperately, but the beasts are relentless. Amid the chaos, one soldier, bloodied and barely clinging to life, screams for help, calling out to Private Park Junimo, hearing the cry. Another soldier spins around, determination hardening. His expression, he raises his rifle, ready to gun down the creatures and save his comrade. But the kobolds aren't mindless brutes. The moment the gunfire erupts, they scatter with frightening speed, dodging the bullets before they even land. Leaving the wounded soldier lying helplessly on the ground, the man survives, but his injuries are severe. Smoke and blood blanket the battlefield as soldiers cling to their positions. Thinking fast, one of them orders the injured man into a reinforced military supply box. This isn't just any box. It's laced with basic barrier spells, used in emergencies for transport and makeshift cover. Another soldier grabs him and drags him toward it, leaving behind a gruesome trail of blood that stains the grounder. Chilling testament to the slaughter they've just endured. Nearby, the vice president of the unit is frozen in horror. The blood-soaked scene leaves her visibly shaken. A private tries to snap her back to reality, but the carnage is overwhelming. It's easy to forget she's barely 20 years old, and this is her first real mission since her appointment. Meanwhile, Private Park faces a grim dilemma. He can't reinforce the support squad, leaving them dangerously exposed. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, another soldier yells over the gunfire. They're almost out of ammunition. The magazines are running dry. The kobolds, sensing the shift, surge forward in greater numbers. Their frenzy growing. The reality hits hard. They might not survive this. In desperation, Park searches his mind for a solution, recalling the lessons of Corporal Lee Hyun-wook. What would he do now? That thought sparks an idea. Just as the soldiers confirm the worst, they're completely out of ammo. Gripping a weapon he pulled from his inventory, Park shouts to the support squad, his voice cutting through the chaos. He reminds them of a crucial detail. Kobolds are obsessed with shiny objects. That's the key. He lays out his plan: use anything reflective as bait to lure the creatures away, giving the squad and the vice leader a chance to escape. The vice president hesitates, confused and unwilling to agree, but Park doesn't waver. As vice platoon leader, he issues the order, invoking Corporal Lee's words for authority. He reassures them that the Blue Flower Guild is stationed just beyond the red zone, ready to unleash hell on these monsters. With grim determination, Park rallies the troops. "Grit your teeth and run," he commands. As they prepare to move, the monstrous kobolds loom in the shadows, certainly unaware of the devastation about to befall them. Private Park raises his hand, silently acknowledging a harsh truth. His limited electric abilities won't be enough to kill even a single monster. Yet, the thought that he can still use them to protect lives brings a genuine smile to his face. With unwavering resolve and no fear of death, he sprints in the opposite direction, weapon gleaming in his grip. Every kobold in the area locks onto him, their predatory instincts ignited. Like a lone actor on a deadly stage, Park becomes the center of their attention, drawing them away from the platoon. The soldiers watch in disbelief as he signals for them to escape, his actions screaming a single message: "Now's your chance, run." It's heartbreaking. They know what this means. Park is sacrificing himself. The kobolds close in, their clawed limbs reaching out, ready to tear him apart. Yet Park doesn't slow. He runs harder, every stride echoing with determination. In his mind, he recalls Corporal Lee. If Lee were in my place, he'd do the same. Maybe he'd even use me as bait. The thought makes him chuckle grimly. The monsters are about to engulf him. A flash of steel slices through the air like a bolt of lightning. A massive blade crashes down, tearing through kobolds as if they were nothing more than paper dolls. The savage beasts that were moments away from ending Park are shredded into unrecognizable heaps. Still oblivious to the carnage behind him, Park keeps running till he slams into something solid and tumbles to the ground like a sack of bricks. He looks up, stunned, and there stands Corporal Lee, towering, commanding, his blade dripping with power as if it belongs in the hands of a god of war. "I heard every word of that nonsense," Lee says coolly, his presence radiating authority. Mist begins to seep from his sword, blanketing the area in a dense, silvery fog. It swirls like living vapor, neutralizing the toxic gas in the air, purging the battlefield as if morning has broken through hell itself. Park stammers, desperate to explain that he was only joking, just trying to imitate the corporal, but Lee cuts him off not with anger, but with a grin. "Thank you for being alive." The words hit Park like a thunderclap. Tears sting his eyes, his chest swelling with relief and pride. The emotional moment is short-lived. Lee's grin widens into something fierce, predatory. His voice rings out like a battle hymn. "You've got guts, Private. I'm proud of you." He steps forward, tightening his grip on the blade, eyes blazing with anticipation. "Now, let's finish this." With a feral grin and the promise of carnage, Corporal Lee charges headlong into the horde, ready to turn the battlefield into a grand feast of steel and blood. The massacre begins in a whirl of steel. Corporal Lee carves through the kobolds like a man possessed, his blade dancing in his hands like an extension of his own will. Each strike is a precise, deadly arc, reducing the enemy to crimson mist. It's as if he's turned this battlefield into his personal stress relief session. Only his therapy involves turning monsters into minced meat. The ground beneath him is littered with the aftermath fallen kobolds, leaving behind strange, glimmering stones. Lee's eyes light up with hunger, the kind that has nothing to do with food, but everything to do with power. He's practically salivating over the essence stones, as though they were a 5-star delicacy. Meanwhile, Private Park stares in confusion, his face silently screaming, "What's so tasty about a handful of rocks?" Lee throws Park a look sharp enough to cut Steele a silent warning. Eating essence stones in front of a rookie. Absolutely forbidden. Rules are rules. Then something shifts. The tide of kobolds suddenly halts. They're no longer charging like rabid beasts, they're retreating. Lee narrows his eyes. Where's their boss hiding? His question barely forms when the runes glowing on their foreheads shimmer ominously, like a distant summons pulling at their strings. And just like that, the realization hits him they've been called back. One by one, the kobolds pivot and sprint in the opposite direction, vanishing into the dense fog like guilty thieves. For a split second, Lee stands frozen in disbelief, while Park still hasn't connected the dots. Then, like a man shot out of a cannon, Lee bolts after them, barking over his shoulder for Park to move his ass. If those creatures regroup, the entire squad is screwed. Meanwhile, High above the chaos, the woman in charge watches from the rooftop, issuing crisp orders. Her voice cuts through the comms. Hold position. Shoot down anything trying to breach the gas zone. Blue Flower Guild, proceed to Cavalon. The soldiers nod. But one ventures a question: where is she heading? She doesn't miss a beat. Her eyes narrow, suspicion brewing over Lee's uncanny foresight. Something's off, and she intends to find out. I've got something to confirm, she says coolly, before stepping off the 5th floor as if gravity is a mere suggestion. She lands amid swirling green smoke like a phantom. Her descent, as graceful as it is terrifying. Back on the ground, things spiral fast. The vice president is unraveling under pressure. Private M is fading seconds away from blackout without immediate healing. Soldiers scramble to tend to their injured while keeping their defensive box intact. Then the world shatters the formation. Collapses like glass under a hammer. The boss has arrived, and it's nothing like they imagined. No hulking brute, no feral beast. Instead, a sleek, almost sinister figure radiating raw magic tears into their ranks. Spells crackle from its hands, like serpents of light, scattering soldiers who barely manage to hold the line. For all their courage, they're hopelessly outmatched. Then the box falls completely. Like vultures to a carcass, the remaining kobolds surge in a ravenous, tied with murder in their eyes. Ammo runs dry, panic brews. Retreat seems inevitable, and then the boss stiffens. Something isn't right. Through the veil of mist, two silhouettes emerge like Wraith's Corporal Lee and Private Park. Sprinting through a haze of fog and blood, the boss's instincts scream danger. This fight won't be easy. Lee wastes no time. Channeling every ounce of fury, he hurls his blade with bone-shattering force. The weapon whistles through the air, aimed straight for the boss like a silver comet. Reflexes ignite. The duel begins. The boss leaps back narrowly. Dodging the incoming strike butt to the monster boss's surprise, the blade isn't done yet. It pulls off a dazzling trick, bending its trajectory midair like a contestant on a magic show, relentlessly chasing its target like a heat-seeking missile. Just as it's about to land, the agile kobold sidesteps in a swift, calculated move, avoiding the blow once more. It tumbles, but recovers effortlessly, as if a casual stroll, even throwing in a cheeky victory flourish. That smug dance doesn't last long. The kobold freezes when it notices the jar in its grasp, pierced clean through by the blade, its contents now leaking. Rage boils over. Enraged beyond measure, the boss sends a telepathic command to its minions. Attack Corporal Lee and Private Park. Without hesitation, the lackeys launch themselves toward the duo like hounds on the hunt. Corporal Lee feels every instinct, screaming. In alarm, the gravity of the situation finally clicks. The kobolds aren't charging blindly. They're orchestrating a coordinated assault. He pulls Park closer, keeping their distance as the enemy switches tactics. Suddenly, the kobolds start launching poisoned darts with deadly precision, each shot like a sinister party trick in the blink of an eye. Hundreds of tiny venom-tipped needles whistle through the air to Wardley and Park. But Corporal Lee is ready. He plants his feet, stands unwavering, and with a sweeping motion of his sword, deflects every single needle in a metallic whirlwind. Not one touches them. The brief relief is short-lived. Round 2 is already incoming. Another volley slices through the air, this time aimed squarely at Park. Get down, Lee roars. Park ducks just in time as the lethal storm flies past, missing him by mere inches. Then ping, a system window flickers into view. Corporal Lee's ability reads, Metal Control, Current, Load 2,959 grams. But there's a glaring warning. Transition speed too fast for current capacity. No time to worry about that. With quick, decisive movements, Lee channels his power, manipulating the metallic storm to deflect every last dart away from their bodies. It's like a deadly game of dodgeball, only this time, the stakes are life or death. And then another alert. Control lost M7 grade sword. The blade he was wielding is now spinning wildly, free from his grasp, cutting unpredictable arcs through the air. The kobold boss notices something, and it's not good for him. Corporal Lee now has a gun in hand. Without hesitation, Lee fires a barrage of bullets, forcing the kobolds on the defensive. In that instant, realization dawns: this isn't an ordinary commander. This one's a puppeteer, pulling the strings of the entire squad. Killing him could unravel the whole enemy force. But Lee knows the truth: scaring them off won't buy. Enough time, a direct clash here, with Park beside him, is suicide. They need to regroup, fast. To the box formation, move Lee orders. They sprint toward the safe zone, Park stumbling but determined. Just a few feet from safety, the kobolds launch yet another rain of poison darts. Time slows. Death is only inches away. Time diverting the darts in a desperate, sweeping gesture. Park lunges forward, tumbling inside the protective formation. Lee follows in a flash, sealing the barrier behind them. The deadly darts slam against the glowing force field, powerless to break through. Outside, the kobolds hiss and snarl in frustration. Their attack foiled. Inside, Lee throws them a cheeky grin, his expression practically dripping with mockery, a deliberate taunt to rile them up further. Around them, medics rush to tend to the wounded. The vice president, pale and panicked, clutches his head in despair. The other injured soldiers exhale in relief as tension momentarily is set, at least for now, as Corporal Lee stepped back into the fray. His presence was like a stabilizing force in the chaos. The tension in the air shifted slightly, relief flickering. In the eyes of those around him, Private Park turned toward him immediately, his voice urgent. "Sir, Private M has lost consciousness. His condition is critical." Corporal Lee's gaze swept over the scene, brow furrowed. "What about the vice president? She's the best healer in the region." But as his eyes landed on her, the answer became painfully clear. Curled in on herself, the vice president, normally composed and commanding, was trembling uncontrollably. She was paralyzed by fear, her face pale and stricken, eyes wide and unfocused. Whatever resolve she once had been completely shattered by the intensity of the battle. Corporal Lee's expression hardened. His voice carried a sharp edge as he called out to her, "What are you doing? Private M is dying. We need you now." But she didn't respond. Panic clutched her like a vice. Her breathing was shallow, her body frozen. She couldn't move, and she was the only healer left. Cold wave of desperation passed over the squad. Time was slipping through their fingers. Corporal Lee stepped closer, his boots crunching through the debris-strewn ground. His voice dropped in volume but gained intensity. He called her by name, no titles, no formality, just quiet urgency. Thread of familiarity or strength cut through the fog in her mind. Slowly, her eyes lifted to meet his. What she saw wasn't just a soldier, it was a comrade demanding that she rise, not for protocol, but for the lives depending on her. "Get a hold of yourself," he said firmly. "This isn't just about you. If you don't act now, you'll carry this failure for the rest of your life." The words hung in the air like a blade, sharp, unavoidable. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, her trembling fingers curled into fists. The breath she drew in was shaky, and then finally she nodded. Corporal Lee didn't smile, didn't offer comfort, but in his eyes there was the faintest glimmer of relief. The battlefield waited for no one, but for now, hope had taken one shaky step forward. Drawing from his own past, he began to speak not with authority, but with a quiet pain that lingered in every syllable. He shared how a life burdened by unresolved regrets becomes a waking nightmare. His voice was steady but heavy, the weight of experience impossible to ignore. Somehow, his words threaded their way through the fog in her mind like a quiet spell unraveling sorrow, casting light where there had only been shadows, and somewhere in the distance, beyond the magical formation that flickered softly with arcane power, Cobalt watched it all unfold in silence. Inside the barrier, something shifted. Vice President Choi Sun-ha's eyes widened slightly, then cleared. Her gaze, once unfocused, sharpened with resolve. She breathed in slowly. The soft glow of magic returned to her fingertips. The healing began not flashy, but purposeful as she knelt beside the wounded. Her aura finally ignited. Hope flickered. While Sanha focused her energy on stabilizing the fallen, Corporal Lee crouched beside a fading soldier, checking vital signs. The news wasn't good. Private Menai had lost too much blood during the wait, but Sanha didn't falter. Her determination burned quietly, and she poured every ounce of magic into saving him. Corporal Lee offered a soft smile in response, of gratitude. Then he rose with new purpose, silently. He gathered blades his own and those from nearby allies, each handed over with wordless trust. One by one, the weapons hovered around him, responding to his will. The metallic edges shimmering under the green haze that hung over the battlefield. Private Park watched the display in disbelief. "You're not really going to face them alone, are you?" Lee clenched his jaw, eyes locked forward. "I'm done waiting around while they tear through our lines. It's time we show them what we're made of." The scene cut away from the battlefield. Somewhere far from the chaos, a sleek black car glided down the highway like a shadow. Inside, a woman of high status sat poised in elegance. She ended a call abruptly, her fingers brushing against a spider that perched casually on her shoulder as if it belonged there. A faint smirk tugged at her lips. Time to pay a visit. They'll need some consolation. She gave a simple command, "Head to Iwan." Back in the arena, Corporal Lee walked through the lingering smoke green, ghostly and thick. Around him, his gathered blades danced, forming a protective constellation of spinning metal. He stopped at a spot on the ground, an ordinary piece of duct tape. It was the mark he'd made before the ambush, a symbol only he knew the meaning of. Above. The kobolds stirred. Their leader, hulking, grinning, full of malice, bared his teeth at the sight of Lee. Telepathic pulses rippled through the swarm. As he ordered his underlings into position, Lee stood still, surrounded by floating daggers. His expression twisted into something between thrill and vengeance. The trap had been set long ago. The kobolds had walked right into it. From an aerial view, the strategy revealed itself. Boxers, sensors, a precise perimeter. The only section lacking full coverage was the quadrant assigned to Vice President Sanhodel, deliberately left open just in case she needed maneuvering room. Every other inch was accounted for. Every angle calculated. Lee pulled out a compact device, custom-built metal scanner. Its screen flickered to life, revealing red dots scattered across the map. Unrecognized metals, kobold weapons, movements, hiding places, all exposed. It was time. The system chimed in his mind. Effect activated. Consumption current load. 2,959 years of metal. The more metal he absorbed, the more control he had. Now, he was practically a walking arsenal. With a twist of his hand, the daggers launched in every direction, spinning, slicing, perfectly aimed. It wasn't just combat anymore. It was a symphony of steel, the kobolds thought. They had the upper hand. They were wrong. The hunter had entered the field, and the night was just beginning. Meanwhile, tension rippled through the battlefield as the kobold leader began to sense that something was amiss. The trap had been sprung, and it was Corporal Lee pulling the strings. The air whistled with motion as enchanted blades tore through the ranks of the cobalt-skinned creatures, carving arcs of destruction with the grace of dancers and the precision of assassins. Green blood, strangely luminous, sprayed in elegant bursts with every strike, staining the ground in an almost artistic display of violence. Then, one blade different from the rest seemed to develop a will of its own. It spun through the air, with chilling intent, turning its edge toward the kobold leader as if compelled by a vendetta written in steel. But the leader was no simple brute. He raised his hands, summoning his arcane strength in a surge of violet energy that crackled with power. With a snap of his fingers, the air shimmered, and to the surprise of many, the blade froze mid-flight, trapped in a grip of pure magical force. With a sudden pull, he yanked it into his hand as easily as catching a falling leaf. He grinned, triumphant, but Corporal Lee was already a step ahead. In a seamless motion, Lee unleashed a fresh wave of floating blades. They spun outward in an unpredictable dance, descending upon the kobold leader like a storm of razors. The poor creature, now entangled with one blade already, looked like the unwilling star of a medieval circus act gone wrong. Then came the roar. The kobold leader let out a primal scream that echoed across the battlefield. Raw and deafening, so fierce it could have startled a slumbering god. Lee's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face as he watched the impossible unfold. The kobold didn't dodge the blades. He caught them, all five, suspended in his glowing hands. The steel trembled, but didn't break his grasp. Fury radiated off him in waves now, his aura flaring with raw emotion and brute strength. Corporal Lee, never one to back down, smirked and raised his hand once more, fingers twitching as he attempted to reclaim control of the daggers through his power of steel manipulation. "And what if I ask nicely?" he murmured, half serious, half taunting. But before the blades could respond, a system alert flashed in front of his vision like a slap in the face. "Warning, current objects are bound by an unidentified force exceeding your control threshold." Lee's heart skipped. His trump card had just been nullified. Sensing the hesitation, the Cobalt leader raised one clawed hand and gave the order in unison. His underlings sprang into action, hurling poison needles with precision honed by countless battles. One projectile arced from behind, almost invisible till the split second before it was about to land. Lee spun, a fraction too late. The needles struck him squarely, embedding into his back, chest, arms, every exposed inch of flesh. He staggered, refusing to cry out, his body absorbing the assault like a man defying fate itself. The moment hung suspended, breathless and tense. The air seemed to still. Then, the floating daggers, once extensions of Lee's will, clattered to the ground, lifeless. He had lost control. The Cobalt leader blinked, momentarily bewildered. Was it over? His confusion didn't last long. He snapped back into command mode and barked an order. Now, dozens of Cobalts surged forward like a wave of fangs and claws, charging toward the injured soldier who stood defiantly in their path, impaled with venomous spikes like a tragic monument of war. There was no time to think, no time to react, only time to fight. Because whatever came next, Corporal Lee would need far more than skill or wit to survive. He would need a miracle. As the camera narrows in, the scene locks onto a burst of motion, dozens of sharp, poisoned needles slicing through. The air aimed directly at him. But in a flash of brilliance, he acts. A split second before impact, his hands transmute into gleaming steel, the deadly projectiles clinking harmlessly off the impenetrable surface. Had it not been for that instant of instinct, he'd be nothing more than a living pincushion. His teeth, a familiar fire lights up in his eyes. He refuses, absolutely refuses to let this life end like the last. Rising to his feet, he brushes the embedded needles off like they're nothing more than annoying insect bites. His transformed arms gleam under the flickering battlefield light, raw and forged like armor crafted in rage. These arms, these unsung saviors, just pulled him back from the brink. With a fluid motion, he summons his weapons. Twin daggers leap into his hands and begin spinning in the air with flawless precision. Almost like he's putting on a performance for some deadly circus. But this isn't a show. This is fury pure and white-hot. The Cobalts, grotesque and relentless, charge forward with a roar. That's when Corporal Lee lets loose a thunderous command. Everyone out of the way. His voice booms like a war drum. With a single sharp gesture, the daggers open no longer. Just weapons, but extensions of his wrath. They carve through the battlefield, moving so quickly they blur into arcs of silver. Around him, the air stirs into a cyclone of violence, a storm of spinning steel that tears through the enemy ranks. The Cobalts fall one after another, shredded like paper dolls. Their cries lost in the whirlwind. The dust settles slowly, revealing a figure standing tall amidst the carnage. Corporal Lee armor, battered eyes, blazing looks, every bit the war god, the kind who'd be sketched on the cover of a rock album or carved into legend. Across the field, the Cobalt leader freezes, struggling to process what just unfolded. This wasn't a fight. It was an obliteration. Corporal Lee locks eyes with him, voice like iron. "You, me, right now. Let's finish this." Tension crackles in the air as the final duel looms. Corporal Lee may have survived the onslaught, but to walk away from what's coming next, he's going to need more than luck. The battlefield was silent for a heartbeat. Then the air shifted. Cobalt, with an eerie calmness, tipped his mysterious jar forward. A sinister green vapor spilled out, curling across the terrain like a creeping tide. It hissed softly, illuminating the ground in a ghostly glow as it slithered closer to his opponent. Across from him, Corporal Lee stood his ground as the poisonous mist reached his boots. Unfazed, he drew his blade in a single smooth motion. The sword shimmered with a pale, cold sheen before releasing a thick silver fog. It expanded rapidly, pushing against the green smoke in an elemental clash of forces. Within the fog, Li's voice cut through the haze firm and sharp. "I trained for a clean fight. This gas trick? Not impressed." With a flick of his wrist, he activated a compact device, a metal detector modified for combat. The hum of the scanner resonated through the fog, and Li's eyes locked on a faint outline. "No point hiding," he muttered. "You're right where I need you." He moved with caution now. Gone were the reckless attacks of past encounters. He remembered all too well how his weapons had been trapped last time. This time he'd read the battlefield better. Cobalt, meanwhile, remained strangely still. His feet anchored to the ground, body unmoving. Li narrowed his eyes. Something wasn't right. Then came the shimmer. A crimson energy spiraled down from above like a falling net. By the time Li glanced upward, it was too late. The whip-like force struck his leg and yanked him off balance. Cobalt, his arms outstretched, poured all his power into the magical tether. The tendrils of red energy lashed out again, wrapping around Li's limbs. With a forceful pull, he hauled the corporal high into the air. Then, with a savage flick, he slammed him into the earth. Dust exploded on impact. The ground trembled. From the swirling debris, Cobalt let out a crazed, victorious laugh, eyes wide with manic glee. Not yet. Cobalt froze. Through the settling smoke, Corporal Li emerged, bruised and bloodied but standing. His lips were split, blood trickling down his chin, yet his eyes burned with renewed fury. He was done playing hero. Steel had overtaken. His legs and armor formed from sheer will and rage. Before he even hit the ground, his body had reacted, transforming to absorb the fall. "This ends now," Li growled, his breath ragged but steady. "No more games." Cobalt hissed in frustration, spewing garbled incantations, his rage matching Li's intensity. In a blink, he disappeared, tearing through space in a blur of motion. But this time, Li was ready. Cobalt reappeared just behind him, dagger gleaming in his hand. He struck, aiming for the spine. Li spun, pivoting with precision, narrowly dodging the sneak attack. His boots dug into the soil, anchoring him. Stabbing from behind, that's what I hate most. He hurled his sword in a powerful arc toward Cobalt. The wizard raised his dagger to block, but the strain showed in his eyes. His smirk had vanished, now replaced by grim determination. Came the counter. Li lunged forward and drove a steel-clad boot directly into Cobalt's jaw. The blow echoed like thunder. Cobalt was launched backward, spinning wildly, his body bouncing across the ground in ragged skips, as if he were nothing more than a discarded doll. He finally landed, motionless, gasping, face bruised and mask cracked. Li approached slowly, eyes cold. He loomed over the fallen wizard, savoring the long-awaited justice. "I've imagined this moment for a long time," he said quietly. "You're the first." He raised his boot, pressing it onto the shattered remains of Cobalt's mask. "Feel honored. You're the start of something much, much worse." Corporal Li stood victorious, a crooked grin spreading across his face like a scar, healing in reverse. Before him lay the Cobalt sorcerer, broken and gasping, unable to summon even a flicker of magic. This was the moment Li had been chasing for years, his trauma, his tormentor, lying right where he wanted him. The time for vengeance had finally come. With a flick of his wrist, Li hurled a pair of enchanted daggers. They curved through the air like living shadows, slicing at the Cobalt from all angles. The rat-like wizard tried to move, but each blade returned like a vengeful boomerang, cutting deeper every time. The enemy's own dagger lay useless nearby, shattered. His prized smoke jar now just splinters in the dirt. Yet somehow, the bastard clung to life. Li stormed forward, grabbing the creature by the jaw and forcing its snout upward. His sword gleamed with cold intent, poised just above the wizard's skull. He wasn't just going to kill him, he was going to erase him. "You made me live like a dog," Li growled, eyes blazing. "You murdered them. You killed my squad. These daggers, they belonged to the ones you butchered, and now they're the blades ending you." The Cobalt's bloodied eyes widened. Images flashed in Li's mind. Private Park, the kindest soul in his unit. young, hopeful, always looking up to him. Park's laughter, his admiration, and then his head torn from his body by this creature's cruel hand. The memory felt like a knife twisting in Lee's chest. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about justice. With unrelenting force, Lee plunged his sword into the kobold's abdomen. The blade cut deep, and the creature writhed in agony. Suddenly, a faint digital chime echoed in the air. Cloudblade is absorbing blood from an elite target. Unknown energy detected. Progress. 1% the message flickered in the air beside him. But Lee didn't even blink. He twisted the sword deeper. The kobold shrieked, a high-pitched screech that was soon silenced. On the ground, the creature's fallen dagger began to glow faintly. Lee, without looking, extended a hand. The blade floated. Toward him, drawn by his steel manipulation ability, hovering just inches from the kobold's forehead. Lee sneered. "You scarred me once," he whispered. "This is for that." He thrust the dagger forward slowly, methodically splitting the rat wizard's face clean in half. The kobold went still. Another notification appeared before Lee. Cloudblade is now 11% charged. Latent powers will be unlocked once the blade reaches full saturation. Lee ignored it again. The thrill of the kill, the closure, the silence in his soul was reward enough. He had rewritten the first tragedy of his past. Even if just a single chapter was now changed, it gave him something he hadn't felt in years: relief. The smoke around him began to thin. The ruins of the battlefield took shape once more. Then something unexpected happened. A glimmer of light sparked from the kobold's corpse. An object small, round, and radiating a strange heat rolled out. Onto the cracked stone, Lee knelt down. It was a medallion, ebony black, etched with infernal runes. A notification blinked above it. Devil's Medallion acquired Inferno. It pulsed with power hellfire energy, the kind wielded only by the ancient demonic races. Lee stared, stunned. This wasn't just any item. According to the system, it was the highest-ranked artifact among all known medallions. Inferno said to belong to a necromancer of apocalyptic infamy, a shadowy figure who led an army of the undead, spreading terror across what little remained of the world. Humanity's worst nightmare, yet barely anything was known about him. No records, no confirmed sightings, just whispers, warnings, and war stories passed between survivors. Lee's brow furrowed. Why had this fallen kobold possessed such an artifact? Why now? He turned the medallion over in his palm, his expression darkening. He knew one thing, and it chilled him more than the artifact itself. There was a connection between him and the original owner of this cursed object, a shared trait, something buried deep, something that could change everything. Corporal Lee had always kept a critical secret tucked away beneath the surface, unlike others bound to the limitations of their rank. His F-class standing was not the end of the line. Hidden deep within him was a rare evolutionary trait: thrive through ordinary combat experience or relentless training drills, but through an unconventional method of growth, a trait that could unlock terrifying potential. If wielded correctly in his previous life, that potential had barely been realized. He had managed just barely to survive the catastrophic battle within the searing blue-lit chambers of the Blue Lava Golem Workshop. The result? A replica of Inferno, a forged imitation of the legendary Hellfire Medallion. Lacking the full fury and power of the original, and now, that very original, the true Inferno. The authentic Hellfire Medallion had inexplicably appeared before him, glowing with ancient menace. Why was it here? Why now? What had changed? The poisonous gas, lingering from the earlier confrontation, had almost fully dissipated, and Lee, his pulse quickening, glanced around. No one was watching, not yet. Acting quickly, he brought the glowing artifact to his mouth, ready to consume it before anyone could question him. But a voice broke the silence. Sharp, female, unmistakably close. Lee Gunwoo. The name froze him. Sweat instantly beaded across his forehead. He didn't even have to turn around, he knew the voice. The red-haired swordswoman stood just behind him, her tone laced with suspicion and command. A deadly calm radiated from her as she drew her blade in one smooth motion, eyes narrowed in silent accusation. "Who are you really?" she demanded. "And what are you hiding, caught in the open?" Lee's mind raced. The medallion still clutched in his hand, half raised. the truth threatening to spill. Words jammed in his throat, any excuse he could make would sound too rehearsed, too empty. His options were vanishing fast. Then a slow, deliberate clapping echoed through the room. It was a sound that pierced the tension like a blade. From the far side of the chamber, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into view with grace and quiet confidence. Her sleek, intricate armor shimmered under the dim blue glow of molten rock, and her face was obscured behind a delicate mask until she pouted away with the fluid. Practiced motion, it was the Spider Lady, poised and always watching more than she let on. A sly, almost amused smile played at the corner of her lips. "Now that," she said softly, her voice like silk over steel, was quite the performance. "I must say, I'm impressed with how far you've come, Corporal." Lee didn't move. The medallion burned faintly in his palm, the redhead's blade still gleaming nearby, and the Spider Lady's gaze sharp as ever. One thing was certain, his secret was unraveling and fast. As the spider-themed woman approached, a sharp-eyed redhead stepped forward and introduced herself in a commanding tone. "I'm the 1st Battalion Attack Squad Captain of the 3rd AMT Brigade," she stated. "This is an active military operation zone. Civilians aren't allowed." A warning rang with authority, but the newcomer didn't even blink. With confident strides, the Spider Lady walked straight past her, heading directly toward Corporal Lee. Clearly, she had business of her own and wasn't about to let military rules slow her down. Without preamble, she addressed Lee. "Catherine, you," she said smoothly, "head of the Soul Attack Unit from the Blue Flower Guild." She held out a sleek guild card as proof, her smile cool and practiced. Corporal Lee didn't flinch. He stared at the card like it was some foreign object. Her poised introduction didn't impress him one bit. She tilted her head and teased, "What? Living under a rock? Don't tell me you've never heard of me." But his expression said it all. He wasn't clueless. He knew exactly who she was. His silence wasn't from confusion, but something colder. Beneath the surface, old memory stirred, and not the fond kind. Let's rewind on in the chaos of a past battle. A fiery redhead wielding an enormous shield had tried to play her flames, pushing back danger, shouting over the roaring heat. She'd screamed at Lee to keep it together, to survive no matter what. He'd told her to stand aside, but she wouldn't move. Unshakable, stubborn. Moments later, those crawling monstrosities took her down. Her death, tragic, brutal, had one person to blame. Yun Ha. Back in the present, Catherine Eka, Spider Lady, noticed his silence and guessed he might not remember her. Still, she made her point clear. Ignoring her offer meant missing out on a major opportunity. Corporal Lee's eyes didn't flicker. If anything, he looked more interested in imagining how her face might look with a fresh bruise. He wasn't biting. The tension between them thickened like walking through fog made of concrete. Suddenly, the redhead stepped back and, "This isn't a casual meet and greet," she snapped. "You're in a military zone. Leave now." Spider Lady turned her glare toward the captain, her voice as icy as her stare. "Then address me properly," she said. "I'm the leader of the Blue Flower Guild's Soul Attack Unit." And just like that, the air shifted. A silent war of gazes erupted. Both women staring each other down, neither blinking, like gladiators in a quiet arena. Corporal Lee stood awkwardly in the middle of it all, like someone who'd accidentally wandered into a landmine field while looking for his phone. Then salvation arrived in the form of roaring engines and screeching brakes. It's a military truck, pulled up fast and hard, grinding to a stop. Out stepped the battalion commander. He scanned the battlefield, first to the left, spotting the remains of fallen kobolds, then to the right, where their leader lay sprawled like yesterday's trash. Corporal Lee began sweating. Every terrible outcome his brain could imagine began playing in rapid-fire court-martial. Demotion, cleaning latrines forever. The commander's eyes locked on him. Unreadable, Lee tried to mentally detach from his body, then cutting through the thick atmosphere. The commander turned to Catherine Yu with a half-smile. "Been a while," he greeted. Catherine returned the smile, equally cool. "Hasn't it? I was starting to think you'd forgotten me." The commander nodded politely. "Appreciate the reinforcements from the Blue Flower Guild, but this is still a formal military op, showing up without clearance. Not exactly regulation." His words were courteous, but firm. The message was clear. "Thanks, but get out." Catherine sighed as if she'd expected that response. Soldiers, she muttered, half amused, half annoyed. So rigid. Still, she didn't argue. Instead, she leaned into the mystery. "I was just getting to the good part," she said with a smirk. But then, she let it drop. She pulled her guild card to her lips, kissed it lightly, leaving a crimson lipstick mark, and with theatrical flair, slipped it into Corporal Lee's chest pocket. "Call me," she said with a wink, before finally, stepping back after the woman steps out of the restricted zone. The battalion commander doesn't waste a second. He signals Corporal Lee to approach. The young soldier straightens up immediately and stands at attention, ready for whatever comes next. Then the commander drops an unexpected bomb. From this moment forward, Lee is being promoted. He's now the acting squad commander for the Cobalt. Operation, the top priority, rescuing survivors. The commander tells him to take charge-scene roles, coordinate the unit. It's Lee's mission now. Lee doesn't flinch, doesn't protest. He keeps his composure in front of his superiors, but inside, he's not exactly thrilled. He accepts the responsibility in silence, feeling the weight of it sink in. Before dismissing him, the commander adds one last order. After the operation ends and the dust settles, Lee is to return directly to him for a personal debriefing. The discipline of a trained soldier, Lee responds with a firm, "Yes, sir," as they part ways. However, the red-haired woman throws him a piercing look sharp enough to freeze the air between them. Her gaze cuts straight through him, sending an involuntary shiver down his spine. A week passes. We're now outside the 3rd Armored Brigade's 1st Battalion. The atmosphere seems calm, at least on the surface. Suddenly, a system alert flashes. Devil's Medallion absorption complete. Controllable metal weight increased by 499 grams. Corporal Lee now has control over 345.8 grams of metal through his abilities. Another unexpected upgrade. The scene shifts. We're outside the boys' restroom. Inside, the sounds of someone violently throwing up echo off the walls. Another system message appears. Breath room forming in host's stomach. Current fusion level, 1%. Severe pain imminent. The camera pans to reveal Lee, and it's inside the Devil's Medallion is tearing him apart from within. He grips the toilet bowl, his body trembling. Steam begins rising from his skin. His mouth flickers with bursts of fire, barely contained. He's in agony, far worse than anything he's experienced in battle. Private Park strolls in, his usual playful self. Hearing the commotion, he walks up to the stall, smirking. "Hey, Corporal," he teases, "having some quality alone time in there." He chuckles, expecting a light-hearted response. But what's going on inside that stall is anything but funny. Lee's body is glowing. Light. Seeping from his eyes and mouth like he's about to explode, the heat from his transformation turns the restroom into a sauna. Even Park, standing outside, feels a cold shiver run down his spine. Something is seriously wrong. Rewind a bit to the day the Cobalt Gate crisis began. Everyone had underestimated the enemy. The infiltration was faster and deadlier than expected. Countless soldiers fell. It was chaos. Private On M was nearly among the dead. If it hadn't been for the vice president and her healing powers, he wouldn't have made it out alive. She stabilized him just enough for him to be rushed to the military hospital. That day changed Corporal Lee. He realized something harsh and humbling. He couldn't protect everyone by himself, so he shifted his strategy. He began training the support squad, equipping them with the skills to defend themselves instead of relying solely on him. It wasn't easy. Teaching was a challenge, but it was necessary. This change brought unintended consequences. The vice president, who usually kept her distance, suddenly began taking a keen interest in Lee, a bit too much. Interest, actually. She wasn't just checking in. It felt like surveillance. Her attention made Lee uncomfortable. It felt less like admiration and more like scrutiny. Later, we see the vice president again, pestering Lee with more questions. He sighs, visibly drained. "What do you want now?" he asks, clearly fed up. She's not the only one on his case. An orange-haired soldier watches him with simmering anger. Ever since the battalion commander started favoring Lee and suggested he consider a non-commissioned officer track, this guy's been on edge. Jealousy, resentment, maybe both. But Lee doesn't crave the spotlight. He never asked for it. The promotion, the special treatment, it's not what he signed up for. Still, He's not one to ignore his superior's instructions. The commander sees him as more than just a soldier. He sees Lee as a key figure in reshaping the culture of the unit, a future where hierarchy doesn't limit collaboration, a unified military where rank doesn't silence voices to the commander. Lee is a bridge between ideals and reality. To Lee, it just feels like pressure. He scratches his head, staring at the ceiling. Why me? He wonders. Why am I the one this guerrilla thinks can help change the world? Despite his doubts and not being completely sold on the plan, Corporal Lee gives a non-committal response to the higher-ups. He'll think it over during his upcoming vacation. Just like that, 3 weeks vanish. Then vacation day arrives. We open outside the bustling Seoul station. Someone is stationed near the restroom area, clearly on duty. Meanwhile, Corporal Lee is enduring another round of the stomach troubles that have recently become his unfortunate norm. But this time, something unexpected happens. A glowing system notification flashes before his eyes, congratulating him for meeting a unique set of conditions. In return, he receives a new ability, Breath Fire. It's a grade D skill, capable of amplifying his metal absorption by a staggering 50% to 250%. However, there's a catch. The more efficiently the skill operates essentially, the better his internal furnace runs. The more intense the pain it inflicts on him, but that's only part one. The second function of Breath Fire is even more peculiar. Corporal Lee can now store a limited amount of metal up to 3 kilograms in a specially created chamber within his body. With the right trigger, he can unleash it in the form of literal fire breath. It's bizarre, powerful, dangerous, and strangely fitting. He emerges from the bathroom, looking like he just fought a mythical beast drenched in sweat, but no longer plagued by the rumors that had begun to spread about his frequent, dramatic visits to the toilet dot. Standing in front of a mirror in the dressing area, he takes a long, silent look at himself. Beneath the surface, anxiety brews. He doesn't know if his current set of powers is enough to face the next gate. His eyes dim as a painful memory replays. It was during the chaos at Seoul Station a grim day burned into his mind. An outraged crowd had gathered outside, demanding answers from the battalion commander. They wanted to know whether the military planned to abandon the civilians trapped. Inside, chaos reigned. Screams echoed from within the station's walls. Bloodied survivors begged for help, their hands pressed against the glass as they pleaded for rescue. That day still haunts Corporal Lee. He swore then and there he would never let that nightmare repeat. If saving lives meant paying with his own, so be it. The weight of that promise still sits heavily on his shoulders. Now, walking down the familiar halls of Seoul Station, he's not here to relax. Not really. He's here to prepare for what's coming, for the battles ahead, for a different future. Elsewhere, the vice president appears, ready to start her own long overdue break. Looking relaxed for the first time in a while, she pulls out a cigarette and remarks to no one in particular, "Been ages since I had real time off." Then, with a sigh and a mutter about military life being anything but glamorous, she flicks her lighter. It sparks, then sputters. Nothing. Mild irritation crosses her face, and just then timing the universe couldn't have planned better. Corporal Lee appears. Their eyes meet, a spark of recognition, or maybe between them, the vice president, ever composed in public, now shows a rare glimpse of her more casual self. Uncharacteristically candid, she leans slightly toward him and asks, "Got a lighter?" The air thickens with awkwardness. It's a simple question, but the vice president has always kept her personal side under wraps. Letting someone see this unfiltered version of herself feels strangely vulnerable. And so, in this unlikely moment at Seoul Station, a new thread begins to weave itself into the larger tapestry of events. Quiet, subtle, but charged with possibility. The midday sun blazed mercilessly, its heat shimmering over the steel tracks as a train thundered forward. Inside, the vice president and Corporal Lee sat together, sharing an uneasy silence that seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. Eventually, she broke the stillness, offering a small smile as she asked if this was his first vacation. She assumed his parents must be thrilled to have him home. Without so much as a flicker of emotion, Lee replied that both of his parents had passed away. When he was young, the answer hit her like a sudden chill, and she sank into a faint pout. Realizing she might have accidentally made the conversation more awkward, sensing her discomfort, Corporal Lee let out a warm, reassuring smile. He explained that while his early years had been lonely, he eventually found a second family as an adult. The vice president's curiosity sharpened, and she asked who he meant. Lee's gaze drifted for a moment as he recalled familiar faces of coworkers, and finally, with a quiet emphasis, comrades. It wasn't just a word. It was the shorthand for a bond forged in the hardships of military life. Now, with only 4 days and 3 nights for his whirlwind trip to Yeongdeung-po, Lee had one goal on his mind: preparing for the future. And at the top of that preparation list, securing some cold hard cash, his eyes landed on a massive guild billboard, the kind that seemed to promise all the answers. The centerpiece was Gordon Pry, head of Blue Tree, and a man who practically swam in trillions. In Lee's imagination, Gordon lounged in a chair, wine in hand, while dollar bills rained down like a private storm. This was a man who had bought not only power and influence, but also valuable assets, bending the system until it worked entirely in his favor. From Lee's insider knowledge, Gordon's victories came down to one thing: money. And while matching Gordon's fortune was impossible, Lee didn't need that much, just enough to stay clear of the man's shadow. Luckily, time travel had its perks, and Lee knew exactly which future events would turn small investments into towering profits. The trick would be finding the right partner, someone loyal enough to stick through the ups and downs, no matter what. Climbing a set of stairs, Lee caught the sound of a commotion. Voices were raised, one in particular tossing out insults with the finesse of someone handing out flyers. In the center of the fuss stood a silver-haired man gripping a young boy by the arm, demanding to be given work. The boy shook his head, explaining there just weren't many clients these days. Silver Hair wasn't buying it, insisting the boy take whatever job he could find. And then, like a cue in a play, Lee stepped into view. The silver-haired man turned sharply, recognition flashing in his eyes before his entire demeanor shifted. The anger melted away into a wide, easy grin, and he strode toward Lee like they were old friends. But to understand that reaction, we have to go back to a time when this silver-haired figure wasn't quite so fierce. It was the first time they'd met. And like Corporal Lee, the newcomer was also awakened. The scene flickered briefly to the past, a younger, brighter Corporal Lee meeting Silverhead for the first time. Silverhead greeted him with a pleasant smile, and Lee returned the gesture just as warmly back in the present. However, the mood had changed. Silverhead was all friendly banter, but Corporal Lee shut it down fast, reminding him curtly that they weren't exactly on friendly handshake terms. Without lingering, Lee walked toward another boy as if nothing had happened. A round-faced, cheerful-looking fellow couldn't resist stirring the pot, asking Lee what he was even doing here. But Silverhead wasn't about to let the tension fade. He turned back toward Lee with a smirk and tossed out a cutting remark, wondering if Lee had eaten his own brain for lunch. Lee's eyes narrowed into a frosty glare, but Silverhead pressed on, mocking him for forgetting the good old days and offering to give him a refresher. The memory hit, and the story shifted to the past once again. There was Corporal Lee, younger, confident, showing off his awakening by levitating objects in front of a crowd of students. But instead of admiration, he got sarcasm and derision. They called it unimpressive, asking if that was really the best an awakened could do. Among the doubters, Silverhead stood out, spitting pure contempt and calling him a loser and worse. Lee's concentration faltered, and the objects dropped to the ground with a clatter. Silverhead's patience snapped. He slapped Lee so hard it burst his lip, sending blood spilling. Standing over him, Silverhead ripped into him again, his abilities entirely, and promising that if Lee bragged about being awakened one more time, he might as well start digging his own grave. Back in the present, Silverhead carried the same arrogance. Now we learned his full name, Lee Wonell, a C-rank fighter from the Hope Guild. He leaned in, threatening to relive those schoolyard days by beating Lee down until he begged for mercy. Silverhead ordered the chubby onlooker to leave unless he wanted front row seats to the carnage. But Lee remained unshaken, replying in a casual drawl, "Go ahead, try it." His expression didn't flicker. The perfect poker face. The taunt must have struck a nerve because Silverhead snapped, throwing a punch straight at Lee. But the strike stopped cold in midair. A pen hovered inches from Silverhead's eye, spinning with lethal intent. At his feet, blades formed in a tight ring ready to slice at a single command. The camera might as well have pulled back. Silverhead stood trapped in a steel halo of weapons, each one an extension of Corporal Lee's will. Lee spoke evenly, admitting he couldn't guarantee victory in an all-out fight, but he could make absolutely sure Silverhead walked away looking like he'd been crushed by a full army unit, half dead, humiliated, and wishing he'd never opened his mouth. Especially in close combat, Lee made it clear he held the advantage. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Silverhead's face. But before things could explode further, another figure burst in, shouting that they needed to move now or they'd miss the event. He froze mid-step, staring wide-eyed at the bizarre standoff before him, and then a twist. Corporal Lee's demeanor flipped entirely. Suddenly, he was apologizing to Silverhead over and over, playing the victim. Without warning, he stepped forward and wrapped Silverhead in a hug, leaving the man completely speechless. It all starts with Corporal Lee's masterclass in psychological warfare. With a sly smirk, he begins weaving a believable but entirely fabricated tale. He claims to have heard whispers that Silverhead was booted from the White Tiger Guild. Lee paints the picture in vivid detail, describing Silverhead sprinting for his life during his very first raid and suffering a humiliating mishap in the process. The story clearly hits a nerve. Silverhead's shoulders stiffen, his jaw tightening as he demands to know how Lee got hold of such a disgraceful rumor. Lee leans in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, reminding Silverhead that he's got a reputation for running his mouth. If Silverhead doesn't want to become the punchline of an F-rank player's jokes, he'd better straighten up. Never one to waste words, Lee delivers the final blow, a calm but firm suggestion that Silverhead leave before things spiral outside. The Hope Guild all appears peaceful, the perfect illusion hiding the drama brewing inside. Back in the meeting room, Corporal Lee spreads 3 guild cards across the table, trophies given to him by various veteran members. He explains in careful detail the staggering opportunities each guild represents. The boy across from him stares, still struggling to believe it. Are you serious? These stocks? They're really about to explode like that. Lee answers with nothing more than a small, confident nod. That's all it takes. The boy's jaw drops. The magnitude of what he's just learned is enough to rewrite his future. Meanwhile, outside the Blue Tree headquarters, a squad of guards dressed in black stand on alert. One of them, growing restless, suggests they liven things up with a raid. Among the group, Silverhead shifts uncomfortably, his agitation hard to miss. His companion notices instantly, asking what's gotten into him. Before Silverhead can answer, their manager storms into view, his glare slicing through the air, barks at the guards, calling them useless pests for causing trouble in what's meant to be a reserved, orderly area. The attention then lands on a massive, broad-shouldered man. He strides over to Silverhead, fixing him with an unimpressed stare. "You leading this circus?" he asks, his voice dripping with disdain. Resting a heavy hand on Silverhead's shoulder, he mocks him further. "This is Zone C. Do you even know your ABCs?" The humiliation is relentless, and Silverhead's patience snaps. Without warning, he swings a vicious punch that cuts the taunting short. The big man is launched off his feet, leaving the other guards frozen in disbelief. Silverhead doesn't stop there. He pummels his airborne target mid-flight, each blow landing with bone-shattering force. Blood bursts into the air like macabre fireworks, the ground itself fracturing beneath the onslaught. The savage beating continues, every strike splattering more crimson until the man collapses in a ruined heap. Breathing heavily, expression twists into something almost demonic. His voice is low, dangerous. When he gives his next order to a nearby lackey, "Go find Corporal Lee." Inside the Hope Guild, Park Chu was still struggling to process the staggering revelation about the stocks. The very idea that they could skyrocket seemed absurd to him. As leader of the Hope Guild and an analyst-class player, he'd made a career out of logic, and data-wild speculation wasn't his thing. Yet here he was, faced with something that sounded like pure fantasy, skeptical to the core. Park Chu even entertained a darker possibility that this stock tip had been planted with Corporal Lee as bait, a trap designed to make him fall. Sensing the doubt, Corporal Lee leaned in. "Do you really think I'd lie to you?" he asked, his tone steady. Park Chu was quick to answer. He didn't doubt Li's character. That was all the encouragement Li needed. Smiling with genuine confidence, he played his trump card, a chat log between himself and the battalion commander. The messages were unmistakable proof that Li had been invited to join the commission as an officer. The evidence left no room for suspicion. Finally convinced, Park Chu nodded in acceptance. Then Li laid out his real gamble. Every last coin his parents had left him. 20 million won, not a king's ransom, but it was everything he had. He was trusting Park Chu to make it grow. A memory flashed across Li's mind, himself as a boy, weeping alone until a plump, cheerful kid appeared. That boy had told him, "No one is born without talent. The world just calls it a superpower now. You just need to wait until yours is recognized." Back then, those words had been a ray of warmth in Li's otherwise cold and lonely nights. Now, in the present, Li saw that same boy Park Chu as his personal ray of sunshine. But time was running short. Soon, humanity would come face to face with talkative visitors from another world. The technology these beings could share would be a decisive weapon in the Gate War, capable of slowing the waves of monsters pouring through. Li needed someone fluent enough to bridge that gap and transfer those alien secrets to him, and he needed them fast. In young Dungo's blacksmith alley, Li moved from stall to stall, stopping at a merchant's table to ask the price of a Mona stone. He was preparing for the future, assembling a team of 7 dwarven artisans aiming to craft his first master-grade weapon. But to pull it off, he'd need blacksmiths whose skill had already crossed the threshold into true mastery. Before their enemies caught wind of the plan, one stop brought him to a cramped, dimly lit workshop. Behind the counter stood an old man, hammer in hand, eyes locked on his work. Without looking up, the man gruffly told Li that everything worth buying was already on the shelves. This was no ordinary smith. This was Kong Jung-gu, an eccentric genius expelled from the blacksmith guild for his unconventional ways. His stubbornness was legendary. Li offered a polite smile. "I see," he said, though curiosity kept his gaze lingering. Kong was shaping something unusual, a javelin forged from pure orichalcum. Its finish was rough, but its purpose was deadly. Clear. This was the Dragon Slayer, destined for the heart of Terax, the great dragon. Li finally understood why the groundwork for master-grade weapons had been laid in this rundown shop. The door banged open and a woman's voice cut through the clanging metal. She called Li a crusty, earning herself a sharp rebuke from Kang, who told her not to insult customers. She shot back without missing a beat, pointing out his hypocrisy. He'd called customers worse himself. Li, unfazed, kept a pleasant smile. But when he looked at her closely, his expression shifted in recognition. This was Kang Bakel, a face from his past life. She had inherited every skill her master left behind for years after Kong Jung-gu's death, then surpassed him. Her sharp gaze swept over Li, landing on the branded trench coat and worn leather boots he wore. Recognition flickered in her eyes. She shifted effortlessly from acting like an arrogant brat to presenting herself as a refined, charming lady. With a confident smile, she assured the corporal that he wasn't just another random passerby. He was a valued customer. Leaning forward with curious eyes, she asked what he was after, urging him to spill it. The corporal smirked, noticing how perfectly her money-driven personality matched the stereotype of a dwarf. Hooked by her enthusiasm, he listed the items he needed. Without hesitation, he placed 18 million on the counter, sending her into a state of sheer excitement. Old Smith, however, looked puzzled. He could see this young man wasn't a magus, so why was he purchasing highly toxic magical metals, including mystical tungsten alloy beads that would be dangerous for someone without the proper skill to handle them? Smith muttered that this was a waste of money, but before he could say more, the lady waved him off. She reminded him that the corporal surely had a reason for his purchases. The corporal simply replied that he needed them and would be back. To trade again? Smith sighed in resignation, agreeing with a half-hearted sure. With his supplies secured, the corporal turned to leave, tossing a casual farewell to the lady. She beamed, telling him to come back often, her love for money being the only motivation she cared to admit. As he walked away, he silently recalled the tragic end she had met in his previous life, and this time he resolved to protect her no matter what night had fallen. But the streets of the bustling city shone as bright as midday. In a shadowed alley, a hooded figure loitered, watching carefully. Meanwhile, the corporal, carrying a bag full of poisonous metals, began retrieving them one by one. Without hesitation, he treated them like harmless snacks, chewing and swallowing them with the ease of someone eating candy. This was no reckless stunt. He aimed to raise both his poison resistance and the maximum weight of metal he could control before the vacation ended. Who needed a midnight snack when you could have a midnight poison power-up? Suddenly, a system notification flashed before his eyes. Metal absorption in progress, poison enchantment detected. The message confirmed that the metal's toxicity would slightly increase his poison tolerance after absorption. Normally, this would take a set amount of time, but with his newly unlocked breathing room skill, the process was significantly faster. Inside his body, the poison began wreaking havoc, only for the breathing room to activate and unleash its internal flame. The fire melted the toxins, and his furnace ability kicked in, boosting his metal absorption efficiency by an incredible 250%. But the price was steep waves of searing pain gripped him, draining the color from his face. The system bombarded him with warnings about the agony to come, but he pushed forward, forcing himself to keep consuming more. Time was slipping away, and the looming Seoul Station Gate incident would not wait for him to be ready. 2 days later, a hooded subordinate finally reported back to his superior on Corporal Lee's whereabouts. He admitted he had no idea what the corporal was doing, only that he had been locked away for 2 days without emerging once. Under the pale light of the moon, the figure slipped in through the window, only to find the stash of poisonous metals completely gone. At last, the familiar chime of the system window appeared again. This time, it announced that Corporal Lee had achieved Tier 2 resistance to poison, sitting at an impressive 81%. Even better, he had fully absorbed all the metals he had consumed. His controllable metal weight now reached 17.49 Ju. Leap forward. His metal detection had also improved dramatically. He could now sense up to 500 grams of metal from a distance of 135 meters. He paused for a moment, reviewing his progress. The poison resistance was decent, though not quite the game-changer he had hoped for. Still, having enough controllable weight to wield roughly 60 daggers at once was nothing to scoff at before he could dwell further. Another notification appeared, this one congratulating him for achieving his first latent breakthrough. Along with it came a brand new skill trait, Metal Smash, classified as a rank D skill. It allowed him to expend mana to crush a chosen amount of metal, the cost varying with the quantity targeted. A devastating ability, perfect for dismantling weapons or armor in an instant. A grin tugged at his lips. All those hours grinding skills had finally paid off. Just then, a faint disturbance tickled his senses. Without hesitation, he activated his magical metal detection, sweeping the surroundings. Sure enough, an unwanted presence approached. And there he was, Silverhead, swaggering in like he owned the place. Lee didn't even look surprised. Instead, he coolly reminded his visitor that, as a soldier, he was bound by rules and regulations, and it would be better if Silverhead turned around and left. Silverhead, of course, only smiled. Sly, mocking curl of his lips. He wasn't here for conversation. In a blur of motion, he lunged forward, fists aimed to punish. Lee didn't flinch. With a simple, precise movement, he blocked the strike using his silver-coated hand, leaving Silverhead blinking in confusion. Lee calmly suggested they take this fight outside to avoid dragging civilians into the mess, but Silverhead wasn't listening. He wanted a fight. Kicking off the ground with force, Silverhead closed in for another attack. Lee slipped under the strike with practiced ease, then Steelheart Fist, slamming into Silverhead's abdomen. The blow forced a grunt from his opponent and sent him staggering. Still, Silverhead wasn't ready to drop his arrogant front. Regaining his footing, he activated his enchantment and unleashed a devastating Mani-empowered kick. This time, Lee was sent hurtling backward, smashing through walls like some action movie hero mid-stunt. He finally burst out of the building entirely, debris scattering in his wake. Silverhead, relentless as ever, stepped forward intent on finishing the fight. Once and for all, our fallen hero hovers mid-air, drawing in a sharp breath before activating his body-enhancing transformation. His feet harden, morphing into solid steel at just the right moment. As expected, Silverhead reemerges, charging with a wild swing. But, like a dancer in a deadly performance, our hero twists in midair, shifting direction as though it's instinctive. He lands softly, proving that while flight is no longer fully his, clever use of transformation, body strengthening, and metal manipulation still grants him an elegant descent. Silverhead crashes down again, his enchanted leg aimed to pulverize our man like a piece of fruit. Yet with a simple sidestep, quick as lightning, our hero leaves him slamming into the pavement instead. The commotion electrifies the whole building. Curious residents lean out of their windows, watching the impromptu duel unfold like a street show. Silverhead, refusing to be humiliated, shouts across the battlefield. He taunts our hero, demanding that he stop dodging like some cowardly ninja and fight head-on. Ignoring the insults, Corporal Lee vaults back into the air, unleashing a cascade of sharp kicks. None of them find their mark, but his movements reveal years of rigorous military training blended with ninja-like precision. The air itself grows heavy from the pressure of their strikes, and abandoned cars rattle before lifting slightly off the ground. Inside the building, tension mounts as the audience buzzes with excitement. One nervous resident warns the others to steer clear of the first floor, where the chaos has turned into a battleground. Meanwhile, Corporal Lee keeps weaving and dodging with practiced grace, but a dilemma holds him back. With so many civilians nearby, he dares not unleash his true strength, afraid of destroying his carefully laid plans surrounding the Soul Station gate. After a breathtaking flurry of kicks, Silverhead finally lands, glaring at the gawking crowd recording the spectacle on their phones. Realizing this could go viral in an instant, he decides it's time to finish things before the authorities, turn him into a wanted man. Energy floods his legs, glowing brighter with each passing second, as if he's channeling the power of a cosmic leg day. But Corporal Lee simply stands his ground, eyes locked on him, unimpressed. With measured calm, he warns Silverhead that civilians are present, demanding restraint. His words, however, only fuel Silverhead's fury. To him, bystanders are nothing but nuisances trash that should stay out of his way. Silverhead soars again, determined to crush his foe. But Lee doesn't flinch, nor does he dance around anymore. His eyes gleam with a cool blue light, magnetic energy rippling through the air. From nothing, he forges two metallic rings, his hands guiding them like a master conjurer. In one swift motion, he clamps onto Silverhead's leg. The once-proud high-tech gear shatters into fragments, scattering like broken glass. Yet Silverhead, oblivious to the destruction, continues spinning wildly, a gymnast gone rogue, ready to land his strike. Then, as if the fight itself is part of some grand RPG, a glowing system window appears, its text revealing the ability in play. Metal Smash, a rank D skill, fueled by mana, designed to crush and dismantle metal objects. The more complex the material, the higher the mana cost. Silverhead's leg armor collapses completely, reverting to nothing more than ordinary metal. And just as the final blow is about to connect, a scream tears through the night. Its blood splatters. The pavement, Silverhead, once so arrogant, is now writhing in agony. Clutching his mangled leg, Silverhead looked like life itself had sucker-punched him. Corporal Lee stood over him, the kind of presence that makes you feel like fate itself is dealing the cards. Silverhead lay sprawled on the ground, resembling a broken action figure. Yet somehow he still tried to put on the tough guy act. Even while bleeding and defeated, he demanded to know why Lee had gone this far. But Lee wasn't here for sympathy. His eyes were ice, and his words struck harder than a blade as he shot back, asking why Silverhead always pushed things to such extremes. Silverhead, unrepentant, muttered about swatting mosquitoes if they dared to annoy him, his voice dripping. Arrogance, even in defeat. Lee didn't hesitate. He tore into Silverhead's past, spitting out the truth. Men like him were rejects, cast out even by wolves, snarling now like a wounded scavenger. To Corporal Lee. People with bloated egos and superiority complexes never last. They don't play the game, they become its villains. But Silverhead wouldn't shut up. Even beaten, he kept running his mouth, trying to claw back some pride. Lee had no patience left. With a flick of his hand, a sharp, metallic shard appeared at Silverhead's throat. His voice, sharp as a drill sergeant's command, cut the air. "Never show your face to me again. And if you do, it won't just be a leg you lose next time." That was enough to finally shake Silverhead. However, was still burning inside, gritting his teeth as he reminded him that the only reason he was still breathing was because Lee wore a soldier's uniform. Without it, Silverhead's fate would have already been sealed. The cavalry arrived just in time, task force officers in blue swarming the scene. The setting shifted to their headquarters, where Lee soon found himself in the hot seat. The officer leading the inquiry pieced together witness statements that painted Silverhead as vicious and untrustworthy. But this officer, inexperienced in dealing with someone like Lee, couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. A low-rank player walking away from a clash with no injuries. Lee, smooth as ever, brushed it off with a clever excuse crediting his survival to nothing more than sturdy shin and calf guards, cleared to leave. He stepped out of the office. For most of his life, he had despised the humiliating F-rank label. Yet, ironically, it was that very label that allowed him to slip under suspicion. Walking out of a fight against a stronger opponent without anyone daring to dig deeper, but the illusion was cracking. Not long after Lee left, a young officer rushed in with an urgent file. The report claimed that Silverhead, a C-rank, had been crushed by Lee, an F-rank, without Lee taking a single scratch. The officer froze, unable to believe what he was reading. Outside, Lee was already moving fast, too fast for the eyes of ordinary civilians who only felt the rush of air as he shot past them. His mind wasn't on the crowd. It was on the soul. Station tragedy. He remembered the numbers from his past life. The gates at Seoul Station had claimed 124 lives on the first day. Then the body count had risen. Today, he knew 745 casualties were already confirmed, and this was only the beginning. The third wave had yet to arrive, and the disaster was already spiraling into one of the deadliest humanity had ever witnessed. Reports flooded in, experts and civil groups tearing apart the current gate defense system. The criticism was merciless. Flaws, incompetence, weaknesses, every failure was being dragged into the light. And still, Lee soared forward, tension weighing heavily on his chest. He had survived the first two gates, but this one was different, unknown, dangerous. With the limited intel, his carefully crafted plans might no longer work. Still, he was determined. The Seoul Station disaster had been the worst of them all, and this time, he swore he would not let history repeat itself. He would act no matter the cost. As the clock ticked down, one thought pulsed in his head. Am I strong enough yet to stop? This, inside the station, surrounded by ordinary people. Lee's instincts screamed at him to unleash his power, clear them out, force an evacuation, but he held himself back. He knew better. Somewhere among these innocents, in the cover of the crowd, a predator might be hiding, waiting if he chose to slip away and hide during the chaos. He knew he would lose the chance to seize the moment that could alter everything. So instead of retreating, Corporal Lee remained planted in the crowd, his sharp eyes scanning every corner for the slightest anomaly. The countdown loomed over him. Only 2 minutes remained. Just then, a familiar voice cut through the noise. Startling him, the sheen shifted as the platoon's vice president came rushing toward him. She looked completely drained, as if she had sprinted across the city to get there. The moment she caught her breath, she unleashed her frustration, scolding Corporal Lee without holding back. Word had already spread like wildfire throughout the unit rumors that he had visited the police station last night, and now everyone was on edge. Lee scratched the back of his head, baffled by how she even knew he would be here. But she quickly reminded him that he had mentioned something about stopping by Seoul Station. Without giving him room to breathe, she fired. Off another question, why hadn't he been answering his phone? Her sudden presence here felt like a plot twist he hadn't accounted for. And for a brief second, Lee wondered if his actions were beginning to warp the future itself. The clock ticked down to a single minute. The most dangerous gate in the world was seconds away from opening, yet the vice president pressed on, demanding an explanation for his late-night trip to the police station. She wanted every detail, and she wanted it now. But Lee wasn't about to waste precious seconds bickering. There was no time for excuses or conversation. As the moment arrived, Lee acted decisively. He pulled out a handful of small marble-like objects and tossed them onto the station floor. The vice president froze in shock, staring at him as though he had lost his mind. The crowd, too, began to murmur and glare, puzzled by what they saw as childish antics in such a dire moment. The vice president shouted at him again, demanding answers, her voice sharp with disbelief. But Lee ignored the scolding. His focus was elsewhere. He told her firmly that when he gave the signal, she needed to run straight toward the gas masks. She blinked in confusion, not understanding why he was speaking like this, but before she could question him further, a strange haze began to roll in. Sinister smoke seeped through the station, glowing faintly with a purple hue. The air vibrated with tension as the atmosphere darkened. Then, with a sudden rupture, a rift tore open in the center of the station. A swirling violet portal pulsed violently, drawing every gaze toward it. The crowd fell silent in awe and dread, while the vice president looked around in disbelief, struggling to comprehend what she was witnessing. From the gaping portal, a massive creature began to force its way into reality. The ground trembled beneath its weight. Corporal Lee snapped to action, his face set with urgency. He turned and bellowed, signaling for everyone to move head for the gas masks. Now, the spider-like beast finally descended, slamming onto the ground with bone-rattling force. Its arrival sparked pure chaos, the air itself heavy with dread as panic swept through the crowd. With terrifying speed, the monster lunged at helpless civilians, its many legs tearing through the streets like a nightmarish predator. Screams echoed as people ran for their lives, though outrunning the creature seemed nearly impossible. In the middle of the madness, Corporal Lee sprang into action. Without hesitation, he rushed to shield the civilians, guiding them towards safety while barking sharp orders to his men. He told the platoon leader to immediately move toward the designated safe zone and to collect a gas mask from the aid station along the way. But the platoon leader wasn't so easily convinced. Her voice cut back with a stern edge, reminding him that she had no intention of surviving alone. She wasn't just another soldier assigned to fight. Her duty was to evacuate civilians and care for the injured. And she wasn't about to abandon that responsibility. Though she admitted she didn't fully understand what Lee was planning, she placed her trust in him nonetheless. Her command was simple, but heavy with meaning. Stay alive, no matter what. Lee swept up in her resolve, snapped to attention, and answered with unwavering conviction. Yes, madam. Their determination aligned perfectly, soldier to soldier. Leader to leader. The focus shifted then, away from the battlefield and into the tense halls of command. The battalion commander stood before his superior, who looked far from impressed. At the idea of promoting Corporal Lee to him, Lee was nothing more than an F-rank nobody, unworthy of rising through the ranks. But the commander was unshaken. He calmly pushed back, stating that true potential couldn't be measured by rigid rankings or lifeless statistics. The system wasn't flawless. A person's ability to become an outstanding officer extended beyond numbers and test results. His superior scoffed in disbelief, a sharp "what?" escaping his lips. That was all the opening the commander needed. He laid out his case clearly. The ranking system wasn't like choosing levels in a video game. These ranks were assigned by the player training center, supposedly based on battlefield predictions, but predictions were not always reality. As players grew and adapted, their real effectiveness in combat often outstripped what the system gave them credit for. Too many hidden skills and underappreciated talents were left buried because of this rigid grading dot at the training center, South Korea's equivalent of a boot camp. Every recruit trained for 2 months before being given their initial rank. But that rank wasn't the end-all measure of their worth. And Lee, the commander insisted, was proof of that. The debate heated quickly. The superior officer, none other than Brigadier General Choi Yun-kal of the 3rd AMT Brigade, bristled at what he interpreted as a lecture in military affairs. General Choi was no ordinary man. His magic was rumored to rival the destructive force of full-scale tactical weapons. For him, rank and power were everything. With sharp disdain, he questioned why any seasoned veteran would give up cushy positions. In civilian guilds, if the military started elevating so-called low-rankers like Corporal Lee to officer titles, his words cut like steel. His challenge clear. If the system was so flawed, then explain exactly how. The tension was thick, the atmosphere suffocating, until an urgent ring shattered the silence. The general picked up the phone, his expression hardening as the news came through. A gate had opened in the 1st Battalion's territory, right at Seoul Station. But this wasn't just any gate. The message was clear and devastating. It was an unlucky event. The revelation rocked both the commander and General Choi. Everyone knew unlucky events were disasters beyond comprehension, anomalies that warped reality itself. They didn't just summon enemies, they brought debuffs, strange rules, and punishing conditions that turned any mission into a waking nightmare. Back at Seoul Station, the nightmare was already underway. A massive cloud-like barrier encased the area, sealing the chaos within. Inside, players fought desperately to push back waves of the spider-like monsters, flames roaring as they tried to burn the creatures to ash. But the horror grew deeper. The fire barely scorched them. These monsters were resistant, relentless, and hungrier than ever. The true battle was only beginning. Amid the chaos, a soldier, adrenaline coursing through his veins, shouted at his team leader, "What kind of monster is this thing? There's nothing about it in the field guide." His voice barely carried over the din before one of the spider's jagged legs shot toward him like a spear. In a heartbeat, it nearly skewered his skull yet. Just as death seemed certain, another soldier lunged forward. Moving with a burst of speed that would make a cheetah look sluggish, he dragged his comrade out of harm's way. The spider's strike slammed into the earth instead, scattering rock and debris in every direction. Another soldier countered immediately, flames bursting from his weapon as he tried to draw the monster's attention. Meanwhile, the two who'd nearly become spider kebabs struggled to regain their composure. The man who'd saved the first soldier wasn't just anyone, he was John Manu, a Class C veteran known for his gladiator trait, and a core member of Seoul Station's guard. With a voice like steel, John roared to his squad, "Switch to frost runes, freeze its legs before it can move again." They obeyed instantly, channeling their energy into the icy inscriptions. The air thickened with biting cold as the massive arachnid let out a deafening roar, the sound reverberating like the end of the world itself. John gave the signal, and a storm of frost magic engulfed the beast. Within seconds, the spider was locked in a prison of ice. Towering like a grotesque frozen statue, the soldiers exhaled in relief, their lungs burning from the effort. But John's eyes remained sharp. He knew a creature of that size wouldn't stay trapped for long. If they wanted a chance to kill it, now was the time. Without hesitation, John charged. He leaped into the air, sword raised high, aiming to deliver a devastating strike. But as he descended, he caught sight of the spider's eyes. They were moving him, fully conscious, fully aware. Before his blade could strike, the monster shattered its icy bonds in an explosion of shards. John, still midair, suddenly found himself diving straight toward the spider's gaping maw. He reacted instantly, activating his shield guard technique just as bolts of lightning crackled through the battlefield, slamming into the beast with electrifying fury. The spider staggered, its attention snapping toward a new opponent. Corporal Lee had arrived. His presence was commanding, each step carrying the confidence of a battle-hardened hero. Wasting no time, Lee raised his hands and summoned chains of gleaming metal from thin air. They lashed around the spider, coiling tighter with every movement. Of his fingers, the creature writhed, screeching as the bindings constricted. Lee unleashed his rank, B-technique metal smash-pouring mana into the chains until they groaned under the crushing force. Warnings blared in his mind. Mana at 84%, mana at 76%. But Lee ignored them. He wasn't here to conserve strength. With a final, earth-shaking effort, he tightened the bindings until the spider's massive body burst apart, fragments scattering like a watermelon obliterated beneath. A sledgehammer. John could only stare, wide-eyed, his jaw nearly hitting the ground. The sheer force of Lee's power left even a seasoned warrior like him stunned. And he wasn't the only one left in awe. The battlefield falls into stunned silence. Soldiers and civilians alike are left, speechless as chunks of the beast's limbs and streams of green blood splatter across the ground. The grotesque scene is horrifying, yet in the middle of the carnage stands Corporal Lee, utterly unshaken. His chest rises with pride, a newfound strength coursing through his veins. For the first time, he feels unstoppably like nothing in this gate could ever stand in his way. A crooked grin stretches across his face. It isn't only the thought of saving the people around him that fuels this excitement. No, there's something else, an irresistible pull. The promise of rewards, glory, and recognition makes his heart pound even harder. The beast staggers, screeching in agony. The shrill, bone-rattling sound reverberates through the entire zone, sending shivers down the spines of the onlookers, but Corporal Lee doesn't flinch. He doesn't even blink. To him, this is nothing more than the cry of a dying animal. In this moment, he feels like a god standing above a mortal creature. The metallic spheres scattered across the battlefield rise with a sudden hum at Lee's command. With a flick of his hand, they whip through the air and slam into the monster, each one hammering its body with relentless force. Lee's barrage is merciless, his focus razor-sharp. He aims for the spider's weak points, determined to crush it beyond recognition. But the beast is tougher than expected. Its thick hide deflects the attacks, refusing to give way. Any normal man would falter, but Lee's confidence doesn't waver. Instead, he smirks, twisting his hand in a subtle motion. The spheres begin to spin violently, turning into whirling blades of destruction. With every rotation, their impact grows sharper, deadlier, impossible to withstand. The creature realizes too late that it's finished. Its many legs twitch in panic, but its massive body shudders as pain tears through it from the inside out. Lee lets out a manic laugh, taunting his prey. How does it feel? He gears, eyes gleaming with madness. Like you're being ground up in a blender. The monster thrashes, shrieking weakly, its body convulsing under the torment. It can't answer it, can only suffer. And then, with one final spasm, it collapses. A river of green blood gushes from its body, soaking the ground as its life fades. Away, the crowd watches in stunned silence. The nightmare is over. Corporal Lee stands over the corpse, victorious, his power undeniable, and his cunning strategy proven. John, however, is frozen in disbelief. He can't wrap his mind around what he's just witnessed. An entire garrison of trained guards had failed to even scratch the beast. Yet this one man, this seemingly casual soldier, has annihilated it on his own. John has been through countless raids, fought beside seasoned warriors, and seen powerful players rise and fall. But never, not once, has he met someone like Corporal Lee. His nonchalant, almost playful demeanor in the face of such a terrifying monster shakes John to his core. For the first time, he wonders if he's looking at a legend in the flesh. Could Lee be an S-rank player? One of those mythical classes people only whisper about? Before John can piece it all together, he notices someone else nearby, another figure grinding his teeth, visibly frustrated. The man's expression is twisted with fury, as though Lee's victory has stolen something precious from him, ruined his carefully laid plans. Finally, breaking his silence, John steps forward. "I'm John Manu, Seoul Station Guard, Team 2. He declares, his voice sharp with curiosity. "Tell me honestly, are you an S-rank player?" But Corporal Lee only chuckles, his tone calm, almost dismissive. "Don't be so quick to assume." John blinks, taken aback. That wasn't the answer he expected. Confusion swirls in his mind, but before he can demand clarification, the air shifts. The gate begins to rumble ominously. Lee tilts his head, smirking. Again, as fresh shadows pour out of the portal, dozens of spider-like monsters crawl forth, their screeches piercing the air. The first wave isn't finished, not even close. John's jaw tightens in dread, but Lee's expression is the opposite. His grin widens, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Perfect," he mutters. "Let's see how many of you I can take down by myself." With that manic determination burning brighter than ever, Corporal Lee steps forward, ready to face whatever the gate hurls at him. Outside the chaos, a massive black mass looms over the area, dominating the battlefield. The military has already descended in full force. Not just a small unit, but an entire army, with both the 1st and 3rd Battalions mobilized. As if that weren't enough, the Blue Flower Guild also makes its appearance. One of its members, staring at the rows of soldiers, mutters that the sight of military troops brings back old memories. Another guildmate suggests that they gather every mage they can and unleash a wave of high-tier magic against the Dark Dome. But the idea is quickly shot down. A more level-headed member explains that brute force won't work, the dome isn't. Held up by ordinary magic, it's a system rule. Without a way to override that system, there's no breaking through. For now, the only option is to wait. Military helicopters thunder down from above, their rotors kicking up waves of dust as they lower into position. Meanwhile, a glowing red system alert flashes across everyone's vision, laying out the grim terms of this event. Once you step inside, there is no leaving. The minimum entry level is capped at 15. And the objective is simple, yet merciless: survive for 6 hours or slay the boss to escape. Time ticks forward mercilessly. Barely 39 minutes have passed, leaving over 5 long hours on the countdown as the choppers touch ground. Commanding figures emerge from their cabins. Among them is the Lady President of the Blue Flower Guild, her presence immediately noticed. Standing opposite her is the famed battalion commander, who wastes no time in demanding details about the guild's involvement. With a smirk, the Lady President snaps back, questioning if he truly believes her guild would allow any players below level 15 to participate. She challenges his plan of sending in a rescue team, warning that entering the dome is nothing short of suicide. The commander, however, refuses to back down. He reminds her of the 800 civilians trapped inside, demanding to know how they can value soldiers' safety over innocent lives. Then he reveals their trump card: been cutting through monsters without pause, leaving trails of carnage wherever he goes. Right on cue, chaos erupts. A massive spider leg whips toward Lee with bone-shattering force. Instinct takes over. He activates his body-strengthening transformation and launches himself away, letting the deadly strike smash harmlessly against the earth. The monster shrieks in fury, pursuing him without mercy. Lee's sharp eyes dart toward the Soul Station guard. Freeze it like before, he commands, "Understood." John responds, and immediately the unit rains down a barrage of frost magic. The creature screeches as ice creeps up its legs, locking it into a frozen prison. In the middle of this, another figure suddenly darts forward, an interloper aiming to strike at one of the Frostcast. The woman stumbles, caught off guard, but before disaster can strike, Corporal Lee intervenes. Channeling his metal control powers, he summons several spheres of hardened steel. With a swift gesture, he sends them spinning into the spider's exposed belly. The balls rotate at incredible speed, drilling through its carapace and lodging deep inside. The spider thrashes, shrieking in agony before collapsing lifeless to the ground. But there's no time to celebrate. The second monster, trapped only moments ago, shatters its icy bindings with a deafening roar. The battle isn't over, it's only escalating. Rather than faltering, Corporal Lee's eyes burn with even greater determination. He hurls himself at the beast, fists wrapped in metal energy. Ignoring the red warning flashing in his mind, mana critical rapid depletion, he drives forward, unleashing his brutal metal smash again and again. The sound of crushing impact echoing through the battlefield. Finally, with one last devastating blow, he pulverizes the monster's core. It collapses like a broken husk. Victory, however, comes at a steep price. Lee staggers back, sweat pouring down his face. His mana pool flickers dangerously lonely. 39% remains, and the night is far from over. Exhaustion began to creep in as Corporal Lee pushed himself far past his limits, the strain of his relentless effort weighing on him. From a shadowed corner, a mysterious observer studied him with growing confusion. To the observer, it was inconceivable that someone of Lee's caliber would linger around something as mundane as subways or train stations. The sight of such a formidable figure at Soul Station left him utterly baffled. Frustration boiled in his chest. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Corporal Lee had completely disrupted his carefully laid plans, and the observer had never once considered the possibility of failing on his very first mission. His anger only grew when a glowing notification window appeared before him, bluntly announcing his failure. The mission objectives were spelled out with brutal clarity. The observer was supposed to wait until the venomous ironclad spider made its nest at Gate 1 within Soul Station. Completing this would have allowed him to rise from his current status as a mere villain candidate. advancement depended entirely on it. The warning was absolute failure to complete the quest properly would mean game over. Message cut deep. Seething but determined, the mysterious figure clenched his fists. If the mission demanded it, he would find a way to eliminate Corporal Lee from the equation entirely. Meanwhile, in the heart of Seoul Station, the aftermath of chaos began to take shape. Some sections of the station were filled with worried civilians, huddled together, while other corridors lay abandoned, unnervingly quiet. The monstrous invaders had suffered a decisive defeat, and with the fall of the final beast, the first wave officially ended. Victorious, Corporal Lee wasted no time. He barked orders to the nearby guards, demanding they gather immediately. John soon approached, his expression a mixture of relief and gratitude. He admitted that without Lee's intervention, the guards would never have managed to survive the first wave. Taking advantage of the moment, John once again tried to pry information from Lee, asking his name and curious about his rank as a player. Lee, however, did not answer. Instead, his sharp eyes drifted across the assembled soldiers. The men grew uneasy under his cold, assessing stare, whispering among themselves in confusion. In stark contrast, several of the female guards couldn't help but blush, their hearts racing at his intense presence. John noticed this strange behavior and finally asked outright if something was wrong. But Lee wasn't truly with them. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the warnings he had heard. The culprit who had triggered this entire event was supposed to be among the guards. And yet, that person was nowhere in sight.